Okay.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the July 27th special meeting of the Board of Education. This is Sarah Carrier. I'm sorry, I have my video turned off this evening. Again, I'm having a little bit of bandwidth problems, so just keeping my audio on. So we will move forward on to approval of the agenda. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, we'll move into our consent agenda. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves all items on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Aye.
Josh, you were breaking up. Did you second there?
Yes, he did.
Okay. On the question?
On the question, one question I have is the substitute clerical we list as $14 an hour. I believe in December, the minimum wage will go up to $15 an hour.
Second.
I'm just, point being that we have to keep that in mind.
Thank you.
But I mean, it's nothing to change what we're voting on now.
And actually, I just need to look at the list of substitutes.
There's just two.
Oh, can you
It's a
tell me the name?
small one.
Because I don't have the list.
It's in the agenda. Cynthia Smart and Patricia Beal, B-E-A-L-L.
Yeah, because, I was involved with recommending somebody who may be coming. I just wanted to make sure it's not that person. No, that's fine. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, so now we will move into the main focus of our meeting this evening, and that will be a superintendent report from Dr. O'Connell to continue our discussions on reopening. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. O'Connell.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and good evening to our community that are tuning in today. So, John, if I could ask you to put the PowerPoint up.
I just need you to sharing rights to share screen.
Okay.
Do you have it, John?
I don't. Do you want to just make me a co-host? That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
There we go.
Wonderful. Okay, as Sarah had shared, we'd like to continue our discussion from last week at this time. So John, if you could go on to our next slide. So very importantly, I'd like to look at the objectives for this evening. So last week we shared a tremendous amount of information. We wanted to bring you through the work of the task force and give you really the board and the community a flavor of the depth of conversations that we've had over time. So at the end, we launched the thought exchange. And this evening, what we've done is taken the thought exchange, some of the main themes from the thought exchange, and we're putting it as part of our conversations this evening, as they were ideas and thoughts that bubbled up from our community response. So tonight we're going to be touching upon a few things. As you can see, health and safety, and the specific questions related to Department of Health. But again, I'm going to be talking about how we're getting to that point. Special education and ELL, which is English language learners. We have Karen Gatto here this evening. I'd like to discuss a full remote option and discussion there. and specifically where we are. I know last time we met, we still didn't have guidance, and I will tell you at this point, as I'm speaking, we do not have guidance yet from New York State Ed nor the governor's office, but I still want to talk about that anyway this evening, because we do think it is rather important that we at least have some conversation this evening. Some of the questions that bubbled up is what the remote learning day would look like. So we have some conversations to share around that, and then instructional planning. So if we could go to the next slide, John. I think what's very important is to never lose sight of the big picture. So our plans, our reentry school plans, are due into the New York State Education Department as well as the Department of Health on this Friday. And I love this next piece because in our last conversation and meeting with superintendents and the interim commissioner, Tahoe, she made it clear that yes, we'll be submitting our plans on Friday, but she's considering them living documents because there's much information that keeps unfolding over time, et cetera, and that our plans need to build in flexibility. And I think even just with the 3 scenarios that we see in this visual, we do have flexibility built into our plan. So there's really 3 scenarios. The state is asking us to share in 3 different parts of our plan, 3 different scenarios. Schools are fully open. That tends to be if there's low or no spread, that's normal operations with minimal distancing. Then our plan that we're submitting on Friday also has to have a component that says schools are open with enhanced distancing due to minimal or moderate spread of COVID. That's where we discussed last week the hybrid or split schedules. And then schools are closed due to substantial spread, which will lead us to remote instruction. So when we submit our plans, and if you go back to the conversation last week, we had conversations really surrounding these pieces. So this is really very important that you'll see in our plan these 3 particular areas. So as I said, we use the thought exchange to help sort of guide what we would focus on this evening. So John, if you go to the next slide, I'll ask you to take over from there.
Sure. You know, it's great to be part of a learning community that wants to have outreach to the community, consider how we can learn from the insights of everybody around us. And that's what's making Thought Exchange such a valuable tool for us. You could see that after our last meeting, we invited people to give us feedback on what how they reacted to our presentation a week ago tonight. You could see that 396 of our community members participated in that thought exchange. They generated 533 thoughts. And then as they were rating each other's thoughts, we were able to achieve over 19,000 different ratings of those thoughts so that we could really start to see trends and to see what kind of thinking bubbles to the surface. As we look at some of the theming, you'll see some of the major themes that did appear. This bar chart is showing the frequency of thoughts in all of the different areas. Health and safety, a lot of assorted thoughts and a lot of complementary thoughts. A lot of questions and comments regarding an option for remote learning, a lot of comments on instructional programming, and then you see we had questions on special education and our approach for that, as well as planning for our instructional return, questions about our reentry process, and then a little bit on cleaning protocols and transportation and technology. We are preparing an executive report that will really give some details in terms of the kinds of thinking that that was generated, and we will be sharing that as soon as that is put together. We have put together our executive report. You might recall a few weeks ago we were part of that regional thought exchange. We were able to take that executive report, and that was posted on our reentry landing page on our website earlier today. So if you're interested in seeing what the shared thinking throughout our region with those 12 component districts from Putnam, Northern Westchester, BOCES, that data is available and you could peruse that at any moment now.
Great. John, if you could go to the next slide. So as John said, health and safety protocols emerged definitely as a piece to, people and our community's questions. I've mentioned to you that in the report that we will be, or plan, I should say, that we will be submitting to the state, you will note in there health and safety protocols, nursing protocols, et cetera. But what's very important, and I've mentioned this to the board, is that we are in collaboration with the Department of Health. So I've mentioned my weekly telephone calls, or Google Meets, I should say, with the county executive, and his team has put together for superintendents and districts the following webinars this week. And I put all the information because we need to make sure we're on the same page with the Department of Health and the county executive and county, our county partners. So as you can see, tomorrow is a real critical one where we're talking and taking a deeper dive into COVID-19 reporting and contact tracing. Those questions come up often, like what will we do if we receive information that a student is COVID positive or a faculty member is COVID positive? What are the steps? What's involved with the contact tracing, et cetera? So the Department of Health and the county team is meeting with anybody from Westchester County superintendents and their staff to discuss that tomorrow. We're told we're going to get some real straightforward guidance so that we can include that in our plans. So the next session, as you can see, is about personal protective equipment needs and procurement, followed by school facilities and systems, followed by cafeteria and kitchen guidance. So the next 2 days, they know that our plan needs to be filed by Friday. So they are meeting with us to give that level of detail, that level of coordination. So once those are over, we'll certainly be able to include more detail as we continue conversations to answer those very targeted questions. So John, if you could go to the next piece, I'm going to toss that over to you and Karen.
Great. So, there is nothing as high priority for so many of us here in the district and so many parents, within our community, is how we're going to meet the needs of our special learners when we're looking at some of the different environments we might be living in. So this evening, we'd like to provide a little bit more detail on what the state is saying with regards to special education and how we address things at this time. And then really take a look at each building about how services would be provided if we are both in a split scheduling model or in a remote scheduling model. So I'm very, very happy that Karen Gatto, our director of PPS, is with us. And Karen, I will throw it over to you.
Uh-oh.
There you go.
So you just froze. I think, I'm
You're on. I hear you fine, and we'll move on to the New
You're
York State.
good.
Here.
getting a message that I'm unstable, my internet connection anyway. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for giving me the time tonight to talk about special education and English language learners. And as you can see on the first slide, I took the priorities that the regulations are giving us right now that guide our thinking and our planning. And I boiled it down to a few major points. So we understand that we have to provide FAPE, free appropriate public education, consistent with the need to protect health and safety. So health and safety for our students and our staff are really the number one priority. Sharing meaningful parent engagement, again, is a big theme of the regulations. And really making sure that our families and our parents understand what the services look like for our students and how they may be a little different from what's described on an IEP when we provide the services to the best of our ability. Also, to support the social emotional needs. You see, that's the third bullet on the list. So the priorities are pretty clear here. We want our kids to feel safe and comfortable. We want our families to be part of the planning process and understanding the services. And we want to provide safety, health and safety for everyone. Also, we really have to make sure that under whatever conditions we're working with all of our students this year, that the students with the IEPs are going to be provided with all of the accommodations, the modifications, and the technology that they need on the IEP, that are indicated on the IEP. The last thing that's very important, I think, is that for our students with the very highest needs, that in-person services are a priority. And so we really kept these points as some guiding ideas as we plan. For our English language learners, the guidelines are similar. And the theme again is really keeping to providing the services that are understood by the testing information we have for every English language learner. So as an English language learner enters our system or continues in our system, we provide them with some testing that gives us an idea about what level they're at, and that we provide services and how those services are meant to be implemented. And so that's usually through push-in or pull-out. And then we have to make sure that communication in the home language is important, and also social emotional supports. And also, just for Croton, it's very much a priority that we communicate with our families in terms of how their children are receiving these services, and really spend time to help them be our partners in the process. So that being said, as John indicated, we're going to look at 2 different scenarios with these slides. And what you'll see is that they're really very similar from school to school, even though they're slightly different because the needs in each building are a little different. So for CET, for example, looking at a split schedule, what would that look like? Well, our special class in CET, as indicated on the IEP, occurs daily. This is even in a split situation, as does our K-1-2 special ed supports and services. They'll be provided full-time in person. Resource room is provided as per the IEP and the school schedule. So in our planning, we made sure that the schedule in each building really supports the specific services and programs that are indicated on student IEPs. And what I'm including here is a discussion of our continuum. We have special class, we have resource room, we have co-taught classes, and we have related services at CET. So these are all built into the schedule. Our co-taught classes, grades 3 and 4, are provided as per the IEP. And the special education teacher and the gen ed teacher, because remember, co-taught classes are a combination of special educator and general educator working together, will utilize the models of co-teaching, whether it's remote or live. Related services are provided as per the schedule, either remotely or live. And again, they'll be scheduled. ENL services will be provided in small group pullout and or push-in as per the required number of minutes for each student. So it's going to vary for specific students. Our ENL teacher may push into a remote lesson if there's an English language learner in a particular class, or may meet with students separately as well. So now if we move to PVC, we're going to see that it's very similar in some ways. The special classes, as indicated on the IEP, is provided in school 4 days per week. On Wednesday, direct instruction is provided as per the schedule. So these special classes are provided with a high frequency because they're small to begin with. There's a smaller number of students. Consultant teacher support, which is very similar to our co-teaching in CET. We have consultant teacher in PVC, will provide the supports that are indicated on the IEP, collaborating and working closely with the gen ed teacher, and providing services remotely on that Wednesday remote day. Related services occur as identified on a student's schedule. So the students are going to be starting out the year with that schedule, and we're going to be adhering to it. Group sessions are provided following social distancing guidelines. So if someone has a related service that's delivered in a small group, then when they're in school, we're going to be maintaining social distancing. Resource room is scheduled based on the letter day. Again, it's part of the schedule, and special education teachers meet with the resource room groups online and in person, again, depending on where it falls out in the split session. Moving to E&L services, we see that they're recommended, again, the number of minutes based on the student's level and are a combination of push in and pull out. The next slide talks about the same scenario, split schedule in the high school. Special classes, as indicated on the IEP, are provided 4 days per week. Resource room services are provided directly as per the IEP, either live or remotely, following the student's schedule. The small group starts together in the high school with the resource room teacher, and then usually breaks off. So the special ed teacher has the ability to work with individuals or even smaller groups than the 5 students who may participate in a resource room. The high school students for resource room support are used to working independently for a portion of their period. So we want to continue that practice. On the remote day, resource room takes place at the scheduled time. It may be shorter, it's a shorter period of time for the high school, and all students log in remotely. The resource room teacher schedules additional work sessions, check-ins as needed with students on their caseload. So each special ed teacher has a caseload of students, and while supporting them academically, that special ed teacher does a lot to collaborate with the students' other teachers to make sure that they're on target with assignments that are due, or to help with specific learning needs that students may have related to particular assignments. And then on the remote day, resource room takes place at the scheduled time. And consultant teachers, again, we have that at the high school, similar to PVC, where our special ed teachers push into some of the classes to support some of the students who have that service on their IEP. And that will be provided as per the schedule, either remotely or live, as following the schedule of the building. And then E&L services are provided as scheduled as well. Okay, so that's what it looks like in each building following that split schedule. Now, if we looked at a fully remote schedule, if we had to go on a totally remote schedule, we're trying to keep it as similar, but we're going to have some little differences, and we'll talk about that now. So in CET, special class instruction is provided directly to the greatest extent possible. So if I'm the teacher of a special class, I'm going to maintain that direct instruction to the greatest extent possible, understanding that some of the students in that special class have a difficulty being able to attend for a full period of time or a full lesson. So we may have to break things down in smaller segments. We may involve parents more closely to help support the student. We may pull aides into the learning design. All resource room services are provided by the special educator remotely through direct and indirect instruction following the schedule, not too different. Related services are provided remotely through sessions as per the schedule and IEP mandates. All co-teaching services are provided remotely through direct and indirect instruction, again, following the schedule. And our E&L services are provided remotely as per individual need through direct and indirect interactions with students.
Karen, I'd like to just interject if I can, before we leave the CET slide.
Sure.
Because last week, and this is one of the things I saw in the thought exchange, we presented a K2 split schedule scenario where we were going to be using a lot of our aides to supervise those extra classrooms K2. And you mentioned aides and mandated services. And I just wanted to quickly mention for those people that were questioning that when we're looking at the use of aides to cover our split schedule, and we're not going to use any aides that are assigned for a mandated special education purpose. So we have made sure in all of our contingencies that if there are aides that are assigned to special education purposes, that they are free and they're not having to do any obligations for any of our general education students in our split schedule model. So while we're talking about CT, I just wanted to get that in there.
That's a great point. Thank you, John. And then we moved to PVC, and we're going to see some of this very similar thoughts that we saw in CET. All special classes are provided online as per the schedule, utilizing direct and indirect instruction. It's really important for us to maintain our direct person-to-person contact with our students. All consultant teacher services are provided remotely following the schedule. All resource room services will be provided by the special ed teacher remotely through direct and indirect instruction. Aides will check in with assigned students daily. And E&L services are provided remotely as per individual need. Again, there's a required number of minutes that we would follow through direct and indirect interactions. And then finally, we're going to move to the high school for a full remote schedule. And we see that resource room takes place again at the regularly scheduled time for a shorter duration, and all students log in. Resource room teacher works with small group or individual students based on students' needs. We've been able to customize and individualize our levels of support in Croton, and we would not want to lose that even under different scheduling scenarios. Consultant teachers push into classes remotely as per the schedule. And related services are provided remotely following the schedule, again with an emphasis on direct interactions. E&L teachers reach out to individuals and provide group classes as per the schedule during a full remote schedule. And they also collaborate with the mainstream teachers. Very important for them to maintain those collaborations. And those are my slides. Are there any questions?
So we're going to hit the pause button for a minute and give the board a chance to ask questions up to this point. So go ahead. Go ahead, Beth.
I saw you had
Thank
questions.
you. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Karen, so I'm coming at this cold as a new board member, and
Sure.
So the first thing I wanted to, I'm just want to help assess for the public, and I'm sure you have a great answer for this, is how are you communicating with parents right now in the preparation of this? Are you surveying families who currently have IEPs right now? How are you reaching out to get the feedback that they might need about how this would take place?
Great, good question. And we have given that a lot of thought because, again, that's part of the emphasis that we have received from state ed. And so I described in my thinking about that, how we just finished meeting with every parent in the spring. And we talked about the unknown is coming, but let's make a plan, our best plan, the plan that we think is best for each student, and then deal with whatever variation we're going to have to deal with. So I think it's imperative that before we open, a really good detailed communication comes out from my office describing how all of this is going to look, describing the process for making some changes if that's what a family would like to initiate, the process for noting a difference in an IEP, although we're not required to do that. You know, the guidelines are, look, you're designing an IEP that's describing the supports a student would need in the best case scenario. And so you're not going to change it because of the schedule changes that we're experiencing, but you're going to modify it. You're going to do the best you can. You're going to work together. And, you know, in the spring, when we went through these rather sudden, drastic changes, I was very open to hearing from specific parents. I think my intention moving forward is to be very proactive, very communicative, particularly with our families of English language learners as well. We need to really enlist their support as partners and make sure they understand all the variables. So, you know, there are a number of points that I outlined that would go into a really good comprehensive communication from pupil personnel.
And if I could just add to that, that piece, we are still finalizing our plan. So those communications cannot really come out too far ahead of where we are as we start to finalize our plan. And that I go back to the commissioner, you know, when she said these plans are living documents and alluding to, we still have to wait and hear what the governor says in the next week. And besides the announcement of, you know, where we are, the status of schools, will there be additional executive orders that go along with that? So, you know, although we've been having these conversations ongoing, you know, there's still pieces of the puzzle that need to be put together. And we need to address them as they do. So there's, I think, in one word in general, is ongoing communications will really need to be in all of the areas once we land, and I'll put that in air quotes, right? So
I get right. So I guess my perspective would be just to make, because what I hear you saying is that you're actively communicating, which is wonderful. And I just want to make sure, because we've done such a really thorough process of soliciting feedback from the community around reentry plans. I want to make sure English language learners and anyone who has a special education plan feels like the same rigor of feedback was solicited from them, understanding that there are complications around that, like that these plans are tailored and individualized and have a lot of regulations that dictate how they're offered. But I do want to make sure that the same level of thoughtfulness, and what I'm hearing you say is that you intend that and that you're going to do that. So I want to highlight that, because you know, these parents need to, you know, be able to say, okay, here. And I think, frankly, it just like we've been able to surface with the other surveys, we've been able to identify issues that maybe we didn't understand that people were thinking about as much. So I think it could be useful. So, and then the only other question, I apologize, I had was around, I noted that, Karen, you said that in some cases for online, when the delivery across schools, it might not be the same amount of time. And is there a reason for that? If we moved into a hybrid or a remote model, why online instruction, whether it's, you know, with a special education teacher or in the resource room or in the cohort, why they wouldn't be the same amount of time as in the school day, a regular?
From building to building? Well, periods are different lengths of time from building to building.
And they would be consistent So the same amount of time you would do at CET in person would be the same amount of time you would do remotely for CET?
Yes, from what I
Yes.
gather.
Okay.
I think
Yes.
it's
Okay.
slightly different for the high school. They go on a shortened schedule, but John
Okay.
could probably clarify that a little more.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, the special education services, when we're in the building, obviously have to be scheduled around all of the other academic responsibilities of that student. So that lives within how, the container of time, that's the schedule. So where times would have to vary would be where the remote schedule or the split schedule has a different allocation of time within the schedule, because we've got to be aware of, the student getting to everywhere else the student has to get to. So that's where there would have to be an alteration.
Okay.
Hopefully nothing substantial.
Okay.
No, I don't think it is at all.
I have several, if I may, several kind of general, well, more specific questions and then a general question. Just in terms of various kinds of services, what I understand to be hands-on services, literally and figuratively, like PT and OT, how are those related services provided in a remote environment or in a non-remote environment where we are concerned with social distancing?
That's a good question. Again, we look for guidance from Department of Health and CDC and state ed. Right now, they're being provided in our summer program directly, and clinicians wear masks and keep social distancing to the greatest extent possible. We also have remote speech, for example, for the summer program being provided directly. So it's the clinician on one side of the computer screen and the student on the other side. And that's been very effective. We've been doing that all summer for the students who meet the criteria for extended school year.
So I was going to say, for that, it would seem, because of the necessity to wear masks, that probably would be more effective.
Well, it's interesting, Neil, because I observed a session recently and the student had a mask on. And I said, well, shouldn't he have the mask off at speech? And they were like, nope, for the activity at hand and the task that he was required to do, it didn't matter that he had the mask on. And this was a little guy who I would have said, oh, well, he'll never understand the mask thing. They come in off the bus with them. They're fine. They are so responsive. Now, because this little guy had a very short attention span, his aide was sitting next to him to redirect him and reinforce him when he was attending. It was exactly what the best case scenario in my book.
Okay.
We also had facilities build some of those plexi, I know it's a different material, not plexiglass, but some screens. And I left an opening, like when you go to the bank, underneath, so that there could be an exchange that way too. And we're also looking for clear masks.
Okay. Next question. With regard to the high school and middle school in flex and the high school in TAP, where students in TAP spend some period scheduled to be in a, well, I'll call it gen ed class, and some in the TAP room. But even more significantly, in flex, which was meant to be kind of a drop-in as needed, how is that provided? Or is that kind of by the wayside in particularly flex in our situation?
Yeah, well, as we saw in the spring, there were students who were part of that program who needed a heightened level of support, and they had easy access to the staff in that room, the psychologist and the teacher. I think they were using an app to communicate, so there was a real direct line of communication. And that was, just like it is during a typical school day for flex, you need me now, I'm here now. Let's work through whatever your issues are. Also, again, with the staff in the flex room, it's communicating with families more frequently, perhaps, and other faculty to help the student manage what's on his plate.
Okay, I assume that's less of an issue with TAP, because TAP, either you'd be scheduled to be with Sam Acapinti a particular period, or you'd be scheduled to be in a gen ed class.
Right.
for a
So we've
particular period.
expanded the number of the teachers who provide special class. That's what SAM provides. That's what TAP is, special class, smaller numbers. So those will meet more frequently during the split schedule. You know, they'll meet regularly because they're already a smaller number of students. And those, again, are students who probably would benefit for a heightened level of support. So we've built that into the schedule.
Okay, my last question, which is more general, just kind of, because I know you've been thinking about this, obviously, since the semester ended in June, but just wondering, if you look back at all of these areas that you are responsible for between March and June, were there particular gaps or particular issues or concerns that you observed in the provision of special ed services, which we then, you know, and how we've kind of addressed them in what's coming forth or expected for the next school year?
Well, yes, and yes, but I think the process that we have in place for planning for the fall is so different from the process that we had in place to plan for something more reactive. You know, in a sense, it had to be a little more reactive, and now we can be a little more proactive. And we have learned from our reflection and from the input we've heard from everybody. You know, all the stakeholders involved in the task force have been so wonderful. I mean, it's essential to have that kind of planning process. So I think we have addressed some of the gaps, and they're not just the gaps for special ed, but you know, across the board. So I think the idea of moving, remember, if you go back to the very first slide, what's essential? Social emotional, health and safety, direct instruction for the kids who need it the most. I think that those are really good guiding ideas. And, you know, we're just looking for a little more guidance so we can solidify a plan.
Okay.
And Neil, I want to
Yeah.
also add to what Karen said. I wouldn't say it was just directed for special education, but as Karen said, we learned a lot from the outreach through our surveys, through the conversations with the task force. I think you could see last week as we started to present some of our thinking, just the amount and times that there's a touch point for students to have live interactions and with their teachers. I see that as a tremendous difference between you know, from March to June until what we're seeing now in terms of our planning. So, you know, thank you for you know, stopping on that piece for a second.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, and this goes back to something that Beth said earlier, which is not only for the special ed families and the ENL families, but for everybody to understand that what's coming forth is not, all right, what happened between March and June with a little bit of a tweak, but the level of thought and the detail, which we saw in last week's presentation, and I've seen in the task force, that there are meaningful differences and that people should give that consideration, and I'll call it a degree of trust.
That's a good point.
I have a question. I just wanted to get back to our English language learners. It just having sat through these meetings and seeing and being on the task force and seeing how complex all these changes are and how detailed, I'm wondering what kind of challenges we're facing in terms of translation opportunities. I'm wondering if there can be possibly a meeting with a translator just for that particular group. I know our English language learners don't only speak Spanish, but that's, you know, part of it. I just know that with all these details, it can be confusing if you're dealing with a second language. And I'm just wondering also if there's any additional funding that we need or any additional resources. I know those are difficult to come up with, but I just think it's really critical to kind of preparing people for September. I'd just love to hear feedback on that.
Right. So we're always open to having more translators available. So I met with the ENL teachers recently, and we agreed that we should probably, you know, post that again. And also, last year we did some really wonderful things. We had evening parent meetings. We had a couple, you know, and in the fall, we had a really good event to really help people feel comfortable, to understand the services. We gave them information as well as dinner. And it was a wonderful, wonderful evening. And we talked about doing something like that again this fall, maybe remotely. We also talked about the importance of each of the case managers, of the ENL teachers, really reaching out to each family before the start of the year or at the very start of the year to explain how the services are going to look. And what they shared with me too is that there was some need for some of our families to really understand technology more. So we talked about having maybe an evening session where we could give them, again, maybe it's remote, but give them more information about how to access a teacher's website or, you know, the e-learning, the structures that they needed to access. We pinpointed that as being a need.
On that, just thinking about the number of people and so on, might that work better in a socially distanced but non-remote setting because you have a number of people who are not technology savvy, and perhaps, you know, in a large room like the CET multipurpose room with, you know, chairs set far away, and then provide that explanation, because people may come to that where they won't log on.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I'd love to think about something like that, or maybe break it down by building, and then we have an even smaller group, you know. And the ENL teachers are wonderful. They are open to any variation on that. You know, they're like the lifeline for our families.
And on that piece,
I'm sorry.
just to add,
I was sorry, Dr. O'Connell. It's so hard
That's
to jump
okay.
in on Zoom. I was just gonna say, I love all those ideas, and you know, I think the board is supportive of them. You know, you said they may happen. I would love to see them actually happen. And then I'd also like to wrangle an invitation for any dinner that might be happening for this group. I know the board attends other kinds of dinners with the community. I think we would, you know, not to be too pushy, but.
that's how I get many dinner invitations, Andrea. I'm with you. So, but on that piece, I think, you know, we keep coming back to a central theme, and that is the communications plan surrounding, you know, various pieces. And we are, you know, we do have our draft plan where we have our various outreach. And these are great additions. I think some of them are on there already in terms of the principals having their coffees with smaller groups and et cetera. But, you know, that's good information, good sharing. And as Karen shared, they were wonderful events, and it would be nice to once again reconnect with our families.
And one last question, I guess, Karen and Dr. O'Connell, just to clarify for the public, because I think you've told me this before. It's just so outreach is happening to ELL learner families. It's happening in the mode of communication that they speak at their home, because that's what New York State Department of Ed is saying we have to do.
Right.
We're preparing plans and signage that's going to be in English and Spanish and other languages, right? And we're going to, like Andrea said, we're going to translate all of what we're saying here for those families, right? And then we're going to do specific outreach to those families, right? That's what I heard you say. I just want to make sure that that's correct, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great.
We have, people who are readily available to translate documents for us.
Okay,
And
great.
for example, in the spring, if we had meetings, parent meetings for annual reviews, we had a translator at every meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, great. As long as that.
And
Very
that's another reason why I'm really liking the tool Thought Exchange, because it can be used in whatever language a family feels most comfortable. So it's a nice way of using the tool and ensuring that there was that choice.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, can we move on? Another theme that came up in our thought exchange was about the remote learning day. So what would that Wednesday look like? So John, would you take us through this set?
I'd be happy to. So just to set the context and recall back to last week when we're talking about Wednesday remote learning days, we're talking about the split schedule model where we have the orange Croton schedules coming in on Monday, Tuesday, and we have the Harmon schedules marked in black coming in on Thursday and Friday. And we said that Wednesdays we were going to keep everybody at home. We said that Wednesdays were going to be a day for deep cleaning that separates the cohorts. But you might have noticed that in those schedules last week, they were just sort of one big solid green blob. And there was some desire to say, well, what happens on that day? What does it look like? So we had some really good conversation. By we, this is really centered around our building principals and assistant principals. Taking feedback from our springtime learning, taking what we've really come to know, talking to students and teachers, and we said, one of the things we want to do with this e-learning day is really take advantage of the fact that it's an even playing field. It's a time when all kids are at home. It's a time where everybody can actually interact with each other within a classroom in the same mode, because everybody's at home, everybody's there. So how can we take that simple reality and really monopolize upon it? And what the building teams came up with is something called the virtual meeting peers. They're calling them VMPs. And this is a time for direct instruction. So it's a time where the teacher could be on with a whole group and have part of it be actually time where they're talking to the class and they're doing that instruction. But what we know is that good instruction goes far beyond just talking to our students. And what they really want to do is build into this time for small group work, whether it's collaborative, time where a teacher can actually do some targeted intervention with individual students, a time where they can engage with each other and with their teachers in a lot of different ways than just have it be totally an instructional time. And by instructional time, I mean the teacher talking to kids. We wanted to figure out how it could be a true learning environment that replicates all the great things that happens in a classroom to the best of our ability. So when we are looking at what that looks like in terms of the day at CET, we're seeing that, it starts off in the morning like we always do with morning announcements in a morning meeting, that then we are going into time for mathematics work, and you sort of see in the CET schedule how they sort of subdivided the time. So you get the idea that the intro might be something that is more of a mini lesson led by a teacher, but then the deliberate use of the technology while we're all at home to have different kinds of student to student and student to teacher engagement. That goes through with specials and ELA reading and writing workshop straight through to lunch, that we could reserve our sacred time of WIN on a daily basis so that students have that individual attentions that they need addressed, those that need them. That then in the afternoon, we're able to go into a science and social studies period, wrapping up the day with a closing event in the 2 o'clock hour. And then since these are Wednesdays, really monopolizing the end of the day time for teacher planning and teacher meetings. Once again, Wednesdays, those are our long days that go contractually until 4:30. PVC follows a similar paradigm. We are really in a period by period basis, but you see that there is a 25-minute allocation for every period, starting off with some planning and meeting time early in the morning, then starting off with an advisory before we go into our 8-period day. Once again, the VMP with the 25 minutes having a lot of different types of interaction depending where a teacher is in the specific learning of that week. It might be used in a lot of different ways in different classrooms. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about professional learning momentarily. And then at the high school, that those looks very, very similar to the PVC model, where once again, the student would be going in, starting the day with CHAP and then following their 8-period day, where they would be actually using the computer, spending a good deal of time with that live instruction on a Wednesday, but once again, shaking it up so they're engaged in learning in a lot of different ways when they're attending these VM periods from class to class. And I'll just sort of stop there, see if there's any comments or
So
questions.
thank you for pausing there for a minute, John. I think it's really important that throughout, if you don't see at the bottom, we've written draft schedule, we've written times may change. That's really important. What we're trying to do with our conversations with the board is to share as we said, the work of the task force, what our thinking is, where we're headed, to give the community a good sense of our thinking. But we're working out a lot of details in terms of timing of things, especially when we talk schedules. Will we need more time for arrival, for dismissal? So I just want the community and board I've said it a few times, but you can never say it enough. These are, tentative schedules, times, et cetera, just to give you a flavor of the thinking. But we might need to adjust based on various things. Of course, this is an e-learning day for all, so we're not talking about arrivals and dismissals, but I think you get the idea. So it's a good time to pause if the board had any questions on what that Wednesday could look like.
I have a question, but it's really not so much on Wednesday, although it may be. I know last week, I wasn't there, there was a discussion of the various alternatives, including the Monday being the remote day, and then Tuesday, Wednesday / Thursday, Friday. And it seems that the preferable option, and there's pluses and minuses to it, is to have Wednesday be the remote day. The one concern that had been addressed or that had been discussed last week was there are many Monday holidays.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening with regard to how on a day when the schools are closed on Monday for a holiday or scheduled to be closed, how we're going to handle the 2 days of in-person instruction.
So we
and
have,
then
yeah.
for the group that would
Sure.
have otherwise come in on a Monday and Tuesday.
So we have had discussions to look at that contingency. We have some proposals. I think the best proposal, although we haven't landed on this as golden, might be to skew on those weeks the orange group so that instead of attending Monday and Tuesday, they might attend Tuesday and Wednesday. We would then have to have our custodial crew really prepared to do the deep cleaning at days and Wednesday to turn over before the Harmon cohort comes in Thursday, Friday. So we would
So that would be similar to what we would have had if we had every Monday being a day
Mm-hmm.
of
Yes.
remote learning. Okay.
Yeah.
So other than that, that's kind of the way. The only issue is the logistical issue of sufficient cleaning on that Wednesday night instead of
Right.
having all day Wednesday.
yes.
I see.
I have a question as it relates to sessions, and you might address this later, John and Deborah, which is that differentiation in the classroom. I think and where am I coming in? I think what I liked with what I saw is that there's going to be the opportunity for small breakout sessions for children, but I am anticipating that you've thought this through, which is that we're going to have students that are going to have widely different needs coming into the classroom, right? Even a virtual classroom. And so I'm wondering how we're approaching from an instructional perspective, the fact that we might have students whose learning stopped effectively in March this year, and maybe other students who accelerated, and how we're going to manage that in the classroom, like the context of like one classroom. Like, are we going to think about that through professional development or different curriculum modules, like, and how will teachers assess that?
So we have time built in for that level of differentiation. I think once we get into the professional learning aspect, I think maybe it will help to revisit this conversation and speak more to it, because one of the things we're trying to do is create a common method of instructional planning that's built into it, time for teachers to really provide feedback and formative assessment for individuals and groups of kids. So I love, maybe we could come back and revisit this part of the conversation when we do that, and we can talk more, and maybe we'll have some context.
Okay, great.
Great.
Okay, we'll move on. Are we okay? All right. So we'll move into this next section, which we have labeled full-time distance learning option. And John, if you would go to the next slide, please. The last time we met, last Monday, we were very clear that we did not receive New York State Ed guidance on the full-time distance learning as to whether it's an expectation for the district or districts, I should say, to offer that. Knowing it would be definitely is very clear in the guidance for medically vulnerable or students in high risk. That was very clear in the guidance, and we discussed this last time, but in case folks didn't hear this, as you read through the document, it's not clear if state ed was saying it's an expectation for every district to offer this. So I will say right now, absence of guidance, because we still are waiting. I've posed the question individually to state ed in an email. And when we were with Interim Commissioner Tahoe, as a group, we brokered the conversation, and she alluded to that would be something out of the governor's office. Our organization posed the questions to the governor's office. So as of right now, I don't have the answer to this, but what we did was we pursued it further. So what would it look like here in Croton? Because that really bubbled up in the thought exchange. So we wanted to first put it out there that we don't have the guidance nailed down. And we've posed it in several different venues, and we still don't have the answer. But that's not stopping us. We keep, looking to see if we can get the answer to it. But absent of that, we went ahead to say, what could it look like here in Croton? And John, if you could take us through the next slide. So hopefully I've put out enough disclaimers to let you know that it is a concern. Some districts said they might not even talk about it until they get further guidance, but I'd rather talk about it, just let's talk about it and see what it could look like. I wanted to explore it with our team. And so this is what John's going to share.
Sure, and these schedules were shared last week, but I think it's important. I think that some of our community sort of missed the context that this was scenario 3 last week. It's just standing it on its own as full-time distance learning option. And this would be the option if a student were not able to attend school for being medically fragile, or, or other reasons as we get to that. So this is our approach to how a student, while everyone else was in a split schedule model, or the majority of students were in a split schedule model, how they could be at home remotely and still really get the Croton Harmon learning experience. So at CET, what we have done is we have established a remote learning teacher at every single grade level from kindergarten through 4th grade. That remote learning teacher would have the sole responsibility of watching out for the well-being and education of those remote learners. There would be times during the day where that remote learning teacher would be able to schedule ELA social studies sessions in the morning and math science sessions in the afternoon. Right now, we're seeing of approximately 30 minutes. We're really going to really see what the caseload would be, because there might be flexibility in terms of time, which is why, going back to what Dr. O'Connell was saying, we want to remind everybody that all times are still subject to change, because we would obviously like to impact with time to the greatest efficiency as possible. In the middle of the day, once again, that remote teacher would have time, going back to that idea of differentiation, to pull groups in on a daily basis, really around identified need, whether that be remediation or enrichment, to provide some opportunities for students or groups of students based upon those identified needs. When we're looking at the Wednesday, once again, we just went and had reviewed what that Wednesday day looks like, where you're going through more subjects in a shorter period of time. Those students would be joining a cohort to go through that schedule and really experience that Wednesday remote learning day that we just reviewed earlier in the presentation. When we're looking at PVC,
John,
yes.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Of course.
And go back to the CET slide, if you would. I think it's also important to note, and as our conversations with Dr. Mojica, Ms. Maloney, and Ms. Bianchi, in those conversations, we always come back to, we're really looking at and needing a real fluidity between the teaching staff at CET. And you raised a great point, John. It does depend on our numbers and et cetera. So, but we might be at one grade level able to say, okay, this is the remote teacher, maybe, for this grade level. In some other grade levels, we might have to join two people together, like you'll do one piece, another. We're still looking at that. I just want to be very upfront. We might look at, because our numbers will be so small in each of the classrooms, maybe collapsing a 6 section to a 5 section, and then have a remote teacher carved out that way. We are still having conversations to identify, based on our numbers and the scenario, on who that remote teacher would be. So there's a real call for flexibility in our, thinking here on the remote teacher. So John, was there anything else to add to that? I know you've been also involved in individual conversations with our leaders there.
No, that's a good point. We're going to staff this in the best way possible. And really, once, and we'll get to this in a few slides, once we get a better indication as a district about what kind of a population we would be talking about, once again, the greater this population is, the more it reduces the amount of students that are in a classroom, affording us all sorts of flexibility and potential possibilities. So yes, great point, Dr. O'Connell, that this really becomes a fluid situation that we will be able to, monopolize to our best of our ability, depending on a lot of factors that we'll know in the next few weeks.
Can I pop in with just a quick question, John and Dr. O'Connell? John, I heard you allude to, with regard to the Wednesday e-learning for all day, that the students who would be distance learning 100% of the time would be joining those cohorts. So would that mean then on those Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, those remote learners are essentially a third cohort of their own? That they're not sort of within those the cohorts that are in school on Monday or Tuesday or Thursday or Friday. Is that correct?
No, they would actually see, because this is the same schedule that you're looking at, that the remote teacher is also working through with the 50% of the students that are at home. So
Okay.
that means that it's really to maximize time, instead of having the remote people being their own cohort and therefore necessitating another block during the ELA, social studies, or the math science time, it's probably most efficient to take them and embed them into one of those classrooms so that they have that level of a classroom identity, and then could also then be part of that Wednesday cohort as well. So, and once again, subject to change, but the thinking right now would be to still embed them within classroom placement and have them be linked to a classroom.
Wonderful. Thank you. That answers my question.
That's our ultimate goal, Sarah, so everybody has a home, if you will.
Right. That was my concern. Is I wanted them to still feel that connection to their fellow students.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
And then should things change, it's not as if they're, coming in from left field. Hopefully they have established relationships, feel part of a community. So, if and when they're part of the physical space again, they really feel that they have that presence and connection.
So, John, so I can understand how that's going to work practically. If you have student A who is in the second grade class and is going to be coming into school on the Monday, Tuesday, because their last name begins with a D. Okay. And then you have another student whose last name begins with a D, who is being provided with the full-time remote learning option. How does the student whose name begins with a D, who is being provided the full-time remote learning option, who is distance learning with a especially assigned teacher, how is that student become integrated, embedded, part of the classroom that that student would be in if that student came to school?
So I follow you. So they would be connecting basically on Monday, Tuesday with the L through Z's, and they would be connecting on Thursdays and Fridays with the A through K's, and connecting with everybody on the remote learning day Wednesdays. But an important caveat to this conversation is going back to what Sarah was saying. This is really only applying to our third and fourth graders, because we have to once again remember we're going to be recommending that our K and 2s are in school every day. So that
however, you have some students who are medically fragile,
Right.
Yes.
Right? And therefore cannot be in school every day.
Yes.
Even though they would, even though other students will be.
So when we're looking at this schedule, there's sort of two different worlds. A lot of what we've been talking in the past few Q&As is really referring to third and fourth grade. What we have to keep in mind is, yes, K through 2, there will be those medically fragile students, potentially other students who will be on this remote schedule. There will not be a split schedule cohort for them to be with, because they're splitting every single day in terms of physical space, and those K2s are in every day. So in the case of K through 2, you really would have a remote learning cohort with a remote learning teacher. That would be a difference.
And then we would have to look for those opportunities, as we continue to plan to see how we can help make other connections, but that's still a work in progress.
And then as far as the third and fourth graders, they're kind of connected to two different classes of student, because they would meet with the A to L on Monday, Tuesday, and the M to Z on Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then everybody on Wednesday. So it's the same class and they're sort of going back and forth between the two halves. Yeah.
Okay, moving to PVC, John.
All right. So in PVC, these students that would be at home every day are really sort of getting going through the day with a lot of those green times where they're going into the classroom virtually to have that that hybrid learning experience where they're basically online with some of their grade level cohort that are also at home. And joining in with those students and teacher that are in the classroom. And you see how that schedule plays off, and this probably looks familiar from last week's presentation. Those times in yellow, once again, where there are some asynchronous and homework types of moments, but a lot of times when they're in the classroom, when we're talking about professional learning, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that in the classroom time looks like, but it basically goes down to what we're talking about with those remote learning times. When we're looking at those sort of zooming into the classrooms, it's going to look a lot of different ways. Just the way 21st century instruction looks a lot really differently when you're in a classroom. It's going to look different when you're zooming into a classroom. It's going to be some instruction. It's going to be some collaborating. It's going to be some small group works with the teacher, really listening intently and doing formative instruction. So I want to be clear that for those remote learners, it's not going to be as if you are just, there's just a camera on in the classroom and you've got to figure out what's going on. The teacher is going to be, is really working on and will be trained upon how to utilize that time and those students that are online to have it make sense in terms of the instructional arc that they're preparing. So I really want to be clear that it's a more rigorous experience for middle school, and yet hopefully it's going to be a very engaging and joyful experience for those remote learners in the middle school. And once again, that time where they'll go through their whole day with their whole classroom cohort on those Wednesdays. And then when we look at the high school schedule, there really is something that through my work with high school teachers over the past couple of weeks, we've past week, we've added since last Monday. And that is, we had the sort of the guaranteed student experience as we were talking last week, of having 20 minutes that we had in green of being that live time where they're video conferencing into the classroom. What a lot of teachers were saying, could we do more than 20 minutes? So what we've added in is that blue period, which is that optional flex time, where we wanted to have it be very, very clear that a learning expectation could be that a teacher will say, I want a student to be on for a longer time than that 20 minutes, because in the green time, that might be when I am doing some instructional work, some checking in, and then I want to have an optional time for group collaboration. I want to have some time where I could create a breakout room and kids at home could be collaborating with kids in school, and we could really have that kind of a learning dimension as part of the remote learners day, where they're breaking the isolation, they're working with other people. The breakout room could be supervised by the teacher, since there are kids that'll have their screens on in the classroom, and really just create that kind of a vibrant learning scene for those remote learners. Just to move on, and then we could sort of take a pause and see if there's we want to come back to anything with regards to remote learning, is that we have prepared a reopening survey. This is in anticipation of offering this as an option, a potential option to our families. We wanted to, as soon as possible, get an idea of what kind of numbers we would be looking at if this was something that we were going to be going in this direction. So if we open the survey, it is not yet live, it is still in draft form, basically asking a little bit of the obvious demographic information, and then really just saying if we are going to be having that in-person component where we're going to be, having a split schedule, reduced distance, face coverings. Will your child attend school in person? And giving them a chance to answer, and then asking them directly if full-time remote learning is offered when school reopens. Would your child participate in full remote learning model rather than attend in person? And then just to move on to some other things that we thought would be very, very important to know while we're sending out a survey. This one just regarding twins. We do have some twins. There could be some advantage. We don't usually place them in the same section, in the same team. That could have some great advantages for those families should they choose that option. To receive some information for those families that do receive transportation, if they would plan to be on our buses, and also to ask if there's any kinds of internet connectivity needs within households. So those are the kinds of things we also wanted to be sure that we are getting some information out in the next survey that we would be sharing.
And again, to that point, we only asked the question about connectivity, internet connectivity, because we are planning on having each child be given a device in case anybody missed that from our last session. And we believe that perhaps with those data, we would be able to maybe gain a better sense of the impact of numbers on the scenarios that we've been working with, and which we always said we're dependent on numbers, and our staffing is dependent on those numbers, and it's all connected. And we will have the Spanish version of that as well for folks that need that.
So Dr. OConnell, I'm assuming, and John, that's a really helpful point about the survey. So because that was the point I was going to make, which is that it seems like we've got a set of parents who potentially might not be sending their children at all in the fall. And we have to wait state guidance for what that means. And then we have other parents who are saying, send as many of the kids as possible to school in the fall.
Right.
So I'm hoping that this survey could result in some capacity analysis, and that you all would be able to say, at 5% of families at CET, PVC, and the high school opt out, this is how many kids I can bring in. At 10% opting out, at 15%, at 20%. So that might give you more room. That's what I heard you saying, and that's what I hope.
Thank you, Beth. That is exactly what we're saying, because if you go back to one of our initial conversations, we had more grade levels, coming in, right? And then when we did the math of the 6 feet and the, et cetera, and, going down that road, we had to scale it back. So that is, you're onto our thinking. The reason why we want to send it out even before we know if it's, what I'll use the word allowed to do, for lack of another word, but it will help our thinking and planning, because maybe based on that, we could say grade 3, grade 4, that would be the greatest thing, in terms of our thinking, just to have information.
Great. Thank you.
However, I think that if you have more parents deciding they want to select the remote learning option, it would seem that then you would have a situation where, in order to make sure that you had the capacity for all students in CET to be attending at CET, you would then need to combine certain classes, right? Certain teachers, so that you would, in essence, have 3, pick a number, 3 or 4 third grade classes, 3 or 4 second grade classes. Really be moving students around a lot in order to have the capacity to teach remotely for those who choose the full-time remote option, and also to not be underutilizing your staff because they've got 5 kids who are showing up.
Right. And to your point, Neil, too, we have to look at it from the other end, because then if we have the higher remote, we have to make sure we have to be able, have the staff in order to be able to support that, right? So it's really, I don't know if you can see my hands, but it's a real balancing act.
Sure.
All points need to be considered, but the best place to start is to have some idea. And that's why we're going to be launching it sooner rather than later. We're targeting this week so we can start getting feedback, which will inform our discussions moving forward. So thank you for raising those.
Yeah, the other issue that I see is I can see a situation where parents have not initially selected the remote learning option and decide for whatever's happening out in the world or in the school, I prefer remote learning. I want to move my kid over to that side, or vice versa. Students who are full-time remote because of a change in a parental situation or in a decrease in the instances of COVID say, you know what? I want my kid to go 2 days a week. Now what do we do?
Well, we have given that some thought.
Yeah.
And in some of my discussions, we thought maybe it would have to be at least committed for the semester, because to your point, we can't say, okay, this week, I have, I want to be remote, but next week it looks better, I'm going to send my kids. We will have to land on something because we don't have that flexibility. Especially if all of the CDC and DOH and state ed guidance still remains the same.
Sure.
So-
And
so
I think
Dr.
parents will need to understand that.
Yeah, I was about to say, you should put that in the survey, Dr. O'Connell. You should make it explicit that says, if you choose remote, consider remote, but you can't opt back in, because that'll make parents understand that if you're saying remote, you're remote at least for a semester, right? Because that'll make them understand that you can't flip flop, right?
That's a good point. That might drive them to putting I don't know then.
That's harder, right? So maybe you say,
But no, you bring up a good point, and we were, vacillating on what to put, because they always want to be transparent. So it might drive, but I think you have a good point. I like to just put it out there so you can make an informed decision, right?
right? Because we
So-
know as a bottom line, we can't let people flip flop, right? I mean, what I'm
Right.
hearing you say is there's no way that you can decide 1 week to be in person and then the next week to be remote. You have to be in or out, perhaps by semester, right?
Mhm.
But maybe for the year.
Yeah.
And so I think
that was one thought was semester. You think about the ramifications if you switch by semester.
right,
That could, let's think of that from a childcare perspective.
right, it's very hard.
That's a nightmare. So maybe we would say for the year, yeah, I hear you. So
Although
John and
you-
I and the team will give that some more thought before we launch a survey.
To add one other wrinkle to this, it would seem that if you have a child who needs to be remote because the child is quarantining,
Right.
because there is positive COVID in their family or in the group that they would be connected with, that may be a temporary
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Well, that's different, Neil.
Or,
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
but I'm saying that
I hear
also,
Mm-hmm.
and you may then have, in essence, reduced capacity in school. You're not going to allow people to switch for a couple of
Right.
weeks,
Mm-hmm.
but you may have a child, for example, who has a longer term need to be out,
Right.
and then it is possible that you may want to, if you will, invite somebody back in, but
Mhm.
I don't know. You have to figure that out.
Yeah, and to that point, and it just keeps me coming back to how our plans need to be so flexible given the situations that we're in. I can't wait till we get to the point with the DOH Department of Health, that we can start to dovetail in, what if we do have a positive case? How are we handling that? What does that mean with all the facets of, that scenario? Thank you for letting us pause on that need for flexibility. We really emphasized it, I think, in our first meeting with the board and community, that we need to be able to, one day to the next, we might have to change from, let's say, the hybrid model to fully remote the next day, based on the scenario and the guidance of DOH, et cetera, at the time.
I have a question about the survey.
Yeah.
That's not
Can
a commitment to any decision. That is a likelihood that you would choose something, right? So parents would not be selecting that as their option in the survey.
That's true, Brian. And
Okay.
that's why it's not, that, tomorrow or the next day when we send it out, we don't even have our plans in yet, right?
Right.
So it's going to be just some data that might help inform us to have a plan B, C, D ready, but that we can at this point expect the family to make that
Right.
decision.
Right, and yeah,
It'll help
that was what I
inform.
was. That's what I
Yeah.
meant. Is like we can, perhaps you could pose it as what's the likelihood that you would do this, or you might just say yes or no. Either way, it's not a choice. It's just how they're feeling at the moment, and we may
Right.
find that September 1st, the choice is actually different.
And Brian, if you recall, one of our earlier surveys did ask that question about your comfort level. And some folks did respond, this is how I feel now, right? And then, I don't know how I'll feel then, or what the COVID situation in the region will be. And, fair enough. I certainly understand that. What we'll have to give some thought to is when the rubber hits the road, and our task force didn't get to that yet. But I believe one of the choices, John, which you and I went back and forth on, and I don't know where we landed. Did we stay with the not sure at this time, or I'm not sure. Can you go back to the survey, one of the survey questions?
Sure, it was going back to the not sure.
We did still have that there.
What they just saw was the inclined to, I'm not thinking about it, and then I'm not sure. We were considering saying, based upon your current thinking, would you enforce them into a yes or no? We're going back and forth as to the best way to phrase the survey.
Yeah, I think it's valuable information, all those responses.
I see that Josh has a question.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, is my audio better now?
No.
Can everybody hear me okay at all?
You're garbled, but we can make you out.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I guess that's all happy. The first question is, I have concerns about the survey in that we are asking people who are not trained statisticians, who are not trained public health experts, to make decisions about the health of their children in advance, and to make an argument about and to make a decision about that is going to last potentially for the entire school year. That really, really worries. And I really think we need to be careful about driving our
You're breaking up really badly, Josh.
of which the scenario is helped by the opinion of.
Josh, we can't hear you. Can you just do
I just is this any better? I don't know. I'm gonna have to disconnect and reconnect.
Well, I think one of what he was saying is we're asking for people to choose based on not being experts necessarily, and that's accurate. But that's what we're going to ask them to do eventually anyway. But the survey is just saying, how are you feeling right now?
Is the sound any better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually.
I figured out what I think I figured out what the problem was. Yeah, that is my concern. I think we're asking, there's times to make your decision based on polling, and there's times to make your decision based on science. This is a case where I think we need to make our decisions based on science. I think we need to, if there's a good reason for a child to be home, then they should be home. I totally agree with that. My question is, are we driving this? There's a lot of concern right now about this, even the CDC guidelines and whether they have been politicized. And, I really, really would like to see some of this, some more direct guidance. And, it's not just that, we're sitting here, we're thinking about asking parents to tell us what they want. And what I'm hearing from parents is, we really want you to tell us what's safe. And some of them have made up their own minds already about what's safe. Those who tend to be more cautious are saying, I want all the kids home. Right? And not just my kid, I want all the kids home. And those who are less cautious are saying we should open in full. But I just worry a little bit that we're going to end up with a survey that tells us some things about the people who answered the survey, which is a good piece of information to have. I just think we need to be careful about treating that as a scientific result, right?
I can appreciate that, Josh, because we did struggle with it as well. And I think to pull out some pieces of what you said, it's information. The governor has said very clearly he's going to base his decision on whether to open schools next week based on data. And he gave percentages of, where his thinking aligned. And he said that he would use the data points to help him make that decision. I think what we're hearing, to your point, is, two polar opposites. You identify families that say, you know what, it's safer for the kids to be in school. I want my kid in school. And then other folks that are really struggling with it for their reasons. I think for us as a school district, in order to have our finger on the pulse of how people are feeling, I think the survey just gives us a piece of information. We don't even know, as I mentioned in the disclaimers, if this is something that we will be able to offer beyond the medically fragile, beyond, the clarity is needed from the New York State Ed guidance. So we don't know for sure, but we figured let us do our planning, because it is a possibility that it must be a part of our planning. And we want to be ahead of the game there, and not only have some thinking done in this area, but have an idea of who might avail themselves to this. And to Brian's point, it isn't now you've signed on the dotted line and you're committed, but it's really just to give us that flavor of who.
Mm-hmm. Sort of my follow on this is that I also think that one of the good things that we might get out of the survey is a better understanding of how things differ, as you said, the demographics. How do things differ on an age level basis? We've talked a lot about the different scenarios, and each scenario has different combinations of who's coming in. But I also kind of wonder of a hybrid. I mean, could we find ourselves in a hybrid of scenario 2C, I think it was, or 2B, one of the scenario 2s, a hybrid of scenario 2 and scenario 4, where you have some grades that are coming in full-time potentially, or part-time potentially, and other grades that are full-time at home. And that's sort of borne out by, I mean, and I apologize for forwarding it just before the meeting, but there's some scientific research out of Korea which showed that there may be actually some benefit in that the likelihood of the likelihood for the youngest kids, say K through 2, to transmit disease is much lower than the likelihood of older kids. But the moment they reach about 3rd grade, 4th grade, it's about the same as adults. So there was, that was part of the science there. And I shared those articles with the board and the administration late this afternoon. But I think it's something we ought to keep in mind, that we may be able. I wonder whether we can do, just as we've said that we would do that. And I believe it was scenario 3 was to do K through 2 in school every day. And then with the split schedule for PVC and the high for the older grades.
We will be sharing our recommendations to the board, and to give you a little teaser, it will include the K2 coming in daily. But we'll come back to that at the end of the presentation.
Okay. Did I have any other questions?
We can hear you really well now, so that's good.
I figured out. Fixed your headphone jack?
No, it was I had another app running that was sucking up all the bandwidth. I didn't realize. I'll hold the rest of my questions.
But you said something that sparked another thought, so good work there, Josh. Deborah August, our Director of Technology, as well as EduTech, and John, you might want to add more to this, but they are testing our systems. We did increase our bandwidth, and they are testing our systems, I believe, starting tomorrow. John, did you have any more information from Deborah on that?
Well, as we are looking through different solutions, we are really trying to make sure that we don't opt for any solutions that are bandwidth hogs. So we are using our resources with the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center to really look at what our approximate building usage would be, which would probably be within the 100 to 150 device range, and really taking a look at how much bandwidth, how much bandwidth does Google Meet take? How much bandwidth does Zoom take? And really using that to inform decision. Interestingly, all of the solutions we're looking at right now are comparable, all of them around the 450 to 500 megabytes per second. We're looking to increase our pipe to about 2 gigs. So we're, under a theoretical model, we're looking good in terms of our bandwidth compared to usage in a hybrid model where we got a lot of kids dialing in.
I would like to just talk about, reflect for a moment on why people may choose to keep their kids at home, because we've been hearing a lot of feedback from the community about that. And I'm really glad that we're doing the survey, because I agree getting the information is really important. It could be that we may end up using this information for advocacy, because, like, for example, right now, and it appears that while a medically fragile child would be permitted to stay home, if a family member was medically fragile, but the child wasn't, that's not a scenario that the state is really backing up, which doesn't really make sense and maybe puts families at risk. It may be something that the board and our community may want to advocate for with the governor. At this point, getting that information so we can start talking about numbers would be helpful. I mean, just today I read that a couple of days ago that New Jersey decided, the way they stated it was under popular pressure, the governor of New Jersey decided to provide this third option as a choice, and other places are doing that. Today I heard on the radio that certain schools in New York City are providing as a choice, even though the governor said he wasn't clear that that was going to happen. So it's not just about medically fragile, and that might be part of the questionnaire, is asking, why would you want to keep your child at home? And to get back to what Josh was saying, I think there's a lot of misgivings about where the information is coming from, and families are really feeling that it's up to them to make the decision more than maybe they wish it was. And we may end up with a situation where families are just choosing to keep their kids at home if this isn't an option. Right? And I mean, withdrawing them from school, if this isn't an option. That's what I've been hearing a lot of. I think all of us have been hearing families talking about possibly doing homeschooling or coming up with other ways of doing it. So I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. I think it's really timely, something we've really got to keep an eye on. And that was,
And I'm glad you brought it, right. I'm glad you brought up the word homeschooling. So on our website, under the superintendent's page, does have a link to what homeschooling is. And there's a real strict protocol surrounding that. So if anybody did want that information, it's there. But what we're talking about here is the fully remote option should you not send your child to school. We are not talking about homeschooling, just to make sure we're clear.
Oh, no,
So,
I'm saying that.
Yes, I hear you, Andrea.
Is that if the fully remote is not available to a number of people,
Correct.
Seeking alternatives.
It might even be worth asking that question. Would you be considering homeschooling your child if the school does not give that as an option?
I would prefer not asking that
question to ask, though.
Yeah.
I would not prefer to. I don't think that's an appropriate question. We are trying to provide public education. If we're not going to ask, are you going to move your child to a private school? Are you going to move your child to a religious school? It's, are you going to leave our system? That's what you're really saying.
That is exactly
what. If we don't do what you want, you're going to leave.
I mean, it would be really
But
kind of, yeah.
What is the problem with it? If it's from why wouldn't we want to know that? Because the benefit of knowing that would help us understand, on the other end, how we could help those parents who maybe have different filters and are using, there are some families who don't have a choice. Their children are medically vulnerable, or they have individuals in their family who are medically vulnerable. And then there are other sets of parents who have a much also equally very hard choice, which is they can't work if their children aren't in school. So why wouldn't we want to try and get a sense of that number?
I hear you.
I agree, though, that it's hard to ask that question. It's very hard to phrase that question.
It's not actionable. We're not saying you have to opt out right now. We're just saying, hey, folks,
give us a sense.
Give us a sense, because if it turns out that there's 50% of this district, that's a number I threw out, I'm making it up, or 0%, then, but at least we know, we have a sense of where people are thinking.
That's where we landed, just to have a sense and, actually just have something a little bit to anchor our thinking and planning. And again, I think it goes back to the word flexibility. Our plans need to have enough flexibility in them, which is why I really like this piece. But I hear you. We will most likely be doing it at some point this week. Looking for, again, a fast turnaround, like by next week, the end of next week, to get the information. And again, let's see where it brings us, and who knows where it'll bring us. Maybe we'll be right where we are. And, but again, it's, I just like to have a little bit so that I'm not thinking, or presuming I understand.
Right. I think ultimately what we want to find out is what are parents thinking that they would do in a given scenario. What are you going to do? What are you thinking right now? Not binding you to that decision, but what would you be thinking about given a specific set of situations?
Yeah.
Right. And you can kind of infer how likely they are to move to a different option. If you give them a Likert scale of 1 to 4, don't give them the easy out of the maybe. Give them the just 1 to 4. So it's very unlikely, unlikely, likely, and very likely.
You know, Josh, I think we're going to stay away from the Likert scale this time. We did the Likert scale last time, I believe, John, you might recall. And I just think we need to, if we will be asking, I don't know if you saw that piece, exactly what family we're talking about, you know, so there will be name, et cetera. So
Okay.
we can really start to hone in. There was a transportation question because that also plays into our planning where busing is concerned. So this is more specificity in terms of we're asking for exact, you know, specific family information.
Would you do? Okay, got it.
What grade level, because each grade level has an impact. And we are not going Likert this time. We're, again, I'm not looking at it right in front of me, but there was a yes, you know, or there was a no, or I'm not sure, or so there is a little bit of an out too with the I'm not sure. But there's more specificity because I have to start drilling down more as a team.
My personal advice, based on my statistic background, would be to eliminate the I'm not sure's, and just make them tell you. Given what I think right now, this is what I would do.
So that's funny. That is one of the things we started with. So John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Could you put the survey up again?
Sure.
I know a few of us. I know Sarah dropped off, but I think she's back now.
And I apologize if I'm getting down in the weeds.
No, they're good questions. So John and I, when we discuss this, you can see here it's specific. So it's email address, student first name, last name, and they'd have to fill it out for each child. So we did keep the I'm not sure at this time there, but we also talked about, John, that first part you said at this point, or you were
based on my current thinking, or Josh just had some good verbiage as well.
My inclination.
Based on the situation as it stands today, or something like that.
And if we do that, then we could eliminate the I'm not sure at this time.
Right. It basically, it forces them to, you might get no answer to that question, but are you going to make the questions, are you going to make all the questions mandatory is the other question.
Well, yes, except for, I think the transportation one, because they might not receive transportation. Yeah, so I hear you. I'm still, I still want to give thought to this, you know.
I'm a little torn on the question too. I'm a little torn on the question too, of whether it should have a maybe or not. Simply because maybes that, I mean, you almost might be better have, rather than having maybe, have yes, leaning no, and no. Might actually be better than yes, no, maybe.
So let us give some more thought, and again, that one sounded more Likert to me, and I'm trying to avoid Likert here because again, I want to have, I know it's not in stone, but I need to have a little bit more data in order to inform our thinking and planning. So
another way you could ask it is to just add an additional question. How sure are you? You know, make them all yes, no. And then at the end, have a final question that says, how sure are you about the answers that you gave today? How likely do you think your answers might be to change? And that gives you a sense of that.
I think we're complicating it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think we are.
Yeah.
I feel very complicated right now. No, only kidding, Josh. No, they're good points to consider. Again, I don't want to get lost with trying to get some information either. So maybe John and I can take that good thinking back and see where we end up.
Perfectly fine. I'm getting down in the weeds anyway. And
I did see that
one
of the questions, one of the answers says homeschool. It possibly you might want to adjust that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Okay. So moving on, we wanted you to see the piece on the survey because we thought that was really very important that you saw some of the questions, got to give us some feedback on those questions. We're now going to go, I believe, to the instructional planning piece. Again, John, if you would take over from there.
Sure, I'd love to. So in many ways, for a lot of parents, this becomes the million-dollar question. They lived through the springtime and some successes and some frustrations with regards to learning. And a lot of them are asking, how are things going to be different in the fall? And this is the beginning of a response to this. When we're looking at instructional planning for the fall, we are looking around some really, really good work that we're doing within the knowledge base within the district. Collaborating with other districts throughout the region to really consider what are the best practices in terms of hybrid learning and blended learning and remote learning. Really, I've been spending time talking to academics, attending webinars, doing a lot of reading. So what I'm presenting to you, I think, is an amalgamation of a lot of different thinking and a lot of different resources that I'm really tailoring to fit what I think is the personality that is very unique to Croton Harmon. So basically, the instructional planning design that I'll bring you through leads you through three specific phases. One is a level of prioritization, then really thinking about a different way of sequencing instructional, just say sequencing instruction, and then taking that sequence and really thinking about how it would have to manifest itself in the different scheduling that we've been talking about. So we'll start off with the reality. Once again, you're going to get a visual that has that that magical magnifying glass 20,000 feet in the air above CET, and this time it's focusing on next year's schedule. And I think this is a really important place to start when we're talking about instructional planning, because when a teacher looks at the schedule, they're thinking about the typical 180 days they have to instruct students in order to cover their course curriculum. And one of the important things that we have to realize is that we are not going to be able to take what we typically do in terms of that 180-day curriculum and think that it's going to be achievable next year. We're going to be coming into greeting students who have not been in school for many months in September. They're going to be coming into school with a lot of artifacts from that experience in the spring that we have to tend to. We have to give them the feeling that things are okay. We have to attend to them socially, emotionally. We have to build community. And we have to do that within a learning environment that's going to look and feel differently. And spend time convincing them that they're safe and sound and that everything is going to be okay. So it will not be a time to jump into formative assessments. It's not going to be a time to jump into curriculum. So right away, we're talking about some days of the school year that we have to attend to reintroducing them to the learning environment and a new learning environment. That being said, we also have to take into consideration that they're going to be coming in with different levels of learning regression. And that part of our learning plan has to address that there might be deficit skills that we have to identify and has to be part of our plan. So when we're taking a look at 180 days, we realize that we're going to have to do some prioritizing. So the first thing that drives our curriculum comes from New York State, and it comes through state standards. And this is something that we have documented on our curriculum maps, which are available publicly. And the first part of our preparing for next year is to really take a look at those curriculum maps and really consider what are the standards within any given unit that are truly the priority that's driving the learning objectives within that unit. Because it is only when we prioritize that we are able then to examine a unit of study and start to say, well, if I prioritize the standards, how does that inform or potentially re-inform the entire purpose of learning for that unit? We call that two different things. We call that enduring understandings or essential questions. And this is keeping the big picture of learning within a unit in a really prominent frame, so that as we go through teaching, we're always thinking, what is my main objective? Why am I teaching what I'm teaching? And potentially prioritizing standards might subtly skew the purpose of a unit. Certainly then towards the bottom of this progression, we're then considering, as we look at a prioritization of standards, a re-identifying or refining of essential learnings or enduring understandings, how is that going to trim down the content that I need to teach? How is it going to trim down the skills that I need to teach? So the first step in really meaningfully address the unique situation that will be 2020, 2021 school year is to say to teachers, you have the permission to take your curriculum and make sure that you are identifying essentials. Once we're dealing with the high school teachers, we are always looking at a lot of difficult questions, because the reality is we don't have any answers at this time about the New York State testing program, the big summative tests that are the regions, or anything from the college boards regarding things like the AP. Those classes that are very content driven, where it's hard sometimes to prioritize. And that's where advocacy comes into play. That's where some data analysis of looking at previous exams and doing some item analysis to really see what are the content skills standards that were stressed in prior tests comes into play. Not an easy task, but an essential task. The next phase, after we really prioritize what learning we're going to be covering in the school year, is to really take a look at how it unfolds over time. We know we've been doing a lot of talking about the structure of time. We know that as we've been looking at time, we've been looking at schedules that look very, very different from the traditional school schedules that kids are used to. So when we're looking at time, a lot of teachers think about, if you take a 4-week unit and you take a look at the traditional lesson planner that so many teachers originally planned it, it has a spot for what are you doing Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. So week 1 is subdivided into 5 specific lessons. And then over the course of a 4-week unit, you would have 20 lessons. And within a blended learning environment, if you think back to all the schedules, who's in one day, who's in another day, who's in all of days, there's a certain fallacy in really following that this is what I'm going to accomplish day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, when all those days are going to look so different. And at any moment, we might change our schedules from one learning environment to a completely different learning environment. So the structure that a lot of people that have spent a lot of time working within the blended learning world recommend is that of the weekly learning arc. And the premise of the weekly learning arc is to basically take a look at that first week, lessons 1 through 5, and say, what are those 5 learning objectives that I had? And how can I take those and sort of condense those into one, not condense those, but take a look at them in their entirety and think about what is the one big learning objective that really drives my instruction for those, what were those first 5 lessons, and now is the first week of a learning arc. As I look at those 5 lessons, then what was the work that I wanted students to do? What was the content I wanted them to possess? What was the skills that I wanted them to practice and refine? How then are those 5 lesson days then put into an expectation that becomes a weekly expectation? And then lastly, how do I end a week so that I am able to do a level of coming together as a community, sharing of experiences, learning from each other, what we call jigsawing in classroom, jigsawing learning. I learned this, you learn this. We have a time to share, learn from each other. How do I have a chance to do some assessment of how well the learning objectives were achieved by individuals and groups? And how do I connect that learning to previous and subsequent learning? All parts of things that we usually do when we're closing lessons. So when we look at a graphic for the weekly learning arc, basically we're looking at 3 parts. And we're thinking about instruction in terms of how do we launch a week? When we're talking about launching a week, we're talking about all of the things that we know we want to do to get the juices of learning flowing. How do we build excitement and anticipation? How do we present a compelling issue or a problem? How do we then introduce that problem and the work expectations? How do we model the skills that are going to be part of it? How do we do some guided practice so that we see how students are employing those skills and offer them some readjustments to how they're looking at skills before they have to employ them independently? How do we assign learning tasks? How do we give them some metacognitive tools, whether it's a rubric, whether it is a learning target, maybe an example of student work from a prior year that says, this is what the learning is going to look like at the end of the year, at the end of the week, at the end of the arc. Then in the middle of the week, how do we assign work? Now, a lot of times we're looking at this work in terms of independent work. What we have to understand in the situation that we find ourselves in right now is that a lot of the environments our students are finding themselves in are isolating. It is the 4 walls of their bedroom, and it's in front of a screen. So not only is it going to be independent task, but it is deliberately planning for collaboration. And then how do we do all the things that we do during the closing of the lesson, that jigsaw learning, that sharing, that assessment, that connecting a 1 week's learning to a larger picture. So when we look at another visual of how we're really starting to have teachers think about this, it is that launch, that group overview for the week. How does it happen if we are in a hybrid environment? How does it happen in a split schedule? Does it happen on an e-learning day when we're all at home? Does it happen on a day that's a Monday when the Croton kids are in and the Harmon kids are in? This is the kind of specific planning we have to consider to think about how the schedule plays out meaningfully in terms of instruction. Then, where is independent work happening? As independent work is happening, how is the teacher getting a chance to hone in on how individuals are doing and give them feedback, leading to a lot of the questions that we were talking about, Beth, about differentiation. Stressing the importance, once again, of assigning collaborative work, of making sure that all of our students are breaking the walls of isolation and having a chance to really meaningfully work either with other kids at home or other kids that are in the classroom, really breaking down that split schedule barriers during those AB days. And once again, during that collaborative work, figuring out how the teacher is really honing in on those collaborative teams and offering feedback. And then once again, within the schedule, whether it is a split schedule, whether it is a remote schedule, how we come together for all those facets that, that we've talked about as part of the close. So this is a simplified view just for a mile-high view, but I'm hoping that as a board and as a community, you could start to see by taking aspects of learning and identifying them into 4 or 5 different components and considering how they play out now, not within a 40-minute period, but over the course of many days, that we could start to see within all of our schedules how a teacher could look at any given day and think about how its purpose and design looks different based upon where we are in a learning arc. Being an educator, we love acronyms. As I've been working with teachers, and we've had some good work with teachers last week, we had sessions with as many as almost 40 people on at a time. This week we're in the 30s already. Today, I think I had somewhere in the mid 30s, all working together. And here's the important thing, not to be corny, but when we're looking at a learning arc, the A stands for active. We want our kids to have their learning be active. It can't be about pushing pencil and paper, and it can't be about being on websites and Google Forms all day long. We have to think about how they're going to be able to leave their bedrooms at times, leave their computers at times, for their own well-being, interact with their world, how we build assignments that demand that they are interactive with whatever surrounding they're in, whether it is the classroom, whether it is within their own homes. Going back to all of the important work we have been doing with regards to our profile of the graduate this past year with rigor and relevance, to make sure that we're always being mindful of the R in ARC being relevance, that we always want to have the learning that we're engaging our students in have a connection to their own real world experiences so that they understand the purpose for their learning. And really in this day of age, and also intrinsically going back to our profile, to keep the learning cooperative so that once again, we're breaking all of the predispositions we saw, especially within our teenagers, of being loners. I know as a father, I saw my kids shutting down a lot of their social connections through social media and becoming loners. And it's something that I know is worrisome to a lot of us parents that have seen our kids go through the springtime. We want to make sure that our kids are connected to trusted adults. We want to make sure they're connected to their peers, and building that into the learning design is also part of our mission. So I'll just stop there and see if there's any questions or dialogue.
I would just like to add, I know you had 38, 40 last week and over 30 this week. I know you have 10 sessions or 10 other, I shouldn't say sessions, 10 other opportunities in August for staff. And you started working with staff before the close of the school year because we had an additional week when children were gone, because we can't mandate professional development over the summer, but teachers are certainly signing up and taking advantage of this good work. I know I'll connect this back to a request of having the board look at our calendar and make a change maybe at the next meeting to put more superintendent conference days in the beginning of the year so that we have additional time, but this work is well underway.
A question and first an observation. After having heard, John, what you just said, I very much understand why you said what will come out of this when we go back to normal is a very different way of looking at instruction. I mean, I can just see the idea of moving to weekly ARC plan, having staff looking at what they're doing each day differently and therefore becoming much more creative and therefore much more inventive. Well, that's probably a synonym. Much more effective as instructors, and as leaders of their students and as facilitators. Two questions. The first is, when you are talking about each teacher is going to, in essence, going to be looking at for their class, for their week, for their unit, for their all the way out to semester, what are the essential questions and the content and skill and so on? How is that going to work with regard to our concern that we've had over the years that students in a different class in the same grade are in essence coming out of the year with the same level of, as much as we can, the level of accomplishment and knowledge. Because if each teacher is looking at that for himself or herself, how does that match up with the idea that we have grade level collaboration, cross grade collaboration?
Yeah. So the good news is from all of my experiences, with teachers, there is a great spirit of collaboration. And part of the design of the learnings that we've been doing last week and this week is to really have some group processing of these sort of big pictures like we've been just sort of, presenting, and then basically putting them into long sessions in breakout rooms where they are really thinking this through in terms of their grade level or through their subject area. So there's already been that sort of cross-pollination built into it where they are doing common planning. And therefore, hopefully, really establishing some guaranteed student experiences. What I know is that, our teachers are very collaborative. It's very few that are the loners. Most of them want to really plan together. It's part of the design that we have. Dr. O'Connell mentioned that we have 10 learning experiences coming up in August. Those 10 learning experiences are designed for grade level bands and subject area bands to participate together, just to really address what you're inquiring about, Neil. And that is how we could work together to build consistency and learn from each other and be better for it.
Okay, I'm going to move on to one piece that I'd like to have focus on. And John, if you would go to the next slide. This also bubbled up and I wanted to spend a few minutes on this. We are planning health screening prior to families sending their children to school. We are going to work with an app. So John, would you explain the app that we'll be working with and just some general comments? We're not ready to roll out the specifics of this yet, but I did want to leave the board and the community with an understanding that this will be part of our daily routines and practices. So John?
Sure. We were really lucky enough to learn from other districts and hear about an app that we were able to do some vetting. It's called Link Rapid Health Screener. It is basically, something you could get in the Google Play Store or in your iOS, whatever they call it. I'm an Android guy, so whatever they call the App Store when you have an iPhone, and you're able to have it on your phone, whether you are a staff member, whether you are a parent. You basically you can have access to it. Easy to get up and running. If you could do anything on your phone, you'd be able to click open this app, and basically you will have a report that you fill in. It is something that is very customizable in terms of being able to ask any questions that certainly we would want anything the state requires to be in compliance, any additional information that the district wants. It then gets routed to whatever designated staff people that we want, whether it be an administrator or a nurse, so that we can have any kinds of instant notifications of any kind of a form that is flagged, or if somebody does not respond. So it is a great way to do a screener, a self-reporting screener. Sort of could give you a look about what it looks like from the user end. So they sort of see a very, very, nice looking user interface. The nice thing is that it will pre-populate all of your answers from the day before so that you're able to easily go. You don't have to click on a lot of things if things haven't changed. Basically save and submit, and that's all there is. So it really should be, in terms of reporting from the staff or parent side, something that takes less than a minute. And then we're able to, once again, on our end, get the results, have any red flags, any reports that come back with anything that we wanted to have flagged when we set up the app, that we are then notified. That is looks like a really, really cost-effective and efficient solution for us. So Link Rapid Health Screener is the app that we can anticipate rolling out.
Just one question on that is, has it been, you did mention that it doesn't store the data, or
Correct.
so, but
We're
it just,
saying yes or no.
yes or no, but then it presumably applies it against some criteria to indicate whether to red flag it and send it to us, or?
Correct. So if the question is, do you have a temperature of 100.0 degrees Fahrenheit or greater? And if you hit yes, that's going to flag. Then
Okay, but the
that's
other
what
answers that
don't
don't flag wouldn't, okay.
It'll give a message which would say, you are not to report to school or work or something along those lines. Correct, John?
That's correct.
So a couple things. First, I just now looked at my Google Play Store. I did not see the app, but I did see the, when doing a Google search, did see the link to Link, L-I-N-Q, Rapid Health Screener. The question I have is in terms of, first off, this is all something that a student, parent, staff member will be doing beforehand. And now, as you see on the screen, it says save and submit. Now where does that get submitted to? And if it gets submitted to someplace where it is being saved, then how does the school know? How does the school know whether the what the results were? In other words, if it's one thing to flag the employee or flag the student or flag the parent, but if a parent, student, employee ignore it, then what? How do we know as a district? How do we know as a school nurse?
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, so the app basically has a built-in routing feature into it. As far as I'm understanding, I'm obviously not the app developer. I did, attend the demo and speak with the rep. But from my understanding is that we set up a routing feature so that the reports of anything that gets flagged gets sent to whatever user we designate within the district. That we can also set it up by building so that, let's say it is in the system, you are submitting for a PV student, that it then goes to the nurse within PVC and Mrs. Collins within PVC. And they would get the notification of anything that was a red flag result.
Okay. So that raises the other question, which just has to do with statutory requirements, because this is medical information, HIPAA, the app developers, compliance with all requirements of state law that we've talked about in the past, John. You have any, has that been discussed or reviewed?
What we know is from the company is that the company does not retain the medical information, that they're talking about their security system, and that submissions remain on their secure server, and that no personally identified information is retained within their systems, is my understanding.
However, if we're going to use them, presumably we would have to make sure that they are in compliance with Ed Law 2D and all of the other requirements, HIPAA, and anything else that is out there, which we want to make sure before we have parents or staff members providing personally identifiable information and health information
Definitely.
to a third party.
But
So
Right.
I know that Deb August, as our Director of Technology, has been, really up on all of the legal statutes. And she was on that call, and I will check back with her to make sure that everything was appropriately reviewed. I know that this is a system that is being used by other districts in New York City. They do have within New York State. I know that there are other features that Link also uses in addition to the Rapid Health Screener. But Neil, certainly you bring up a good point, and we could go back and make sure we are doing our due diligence to make sure everything is indeed in compliance.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing where I would want to see the results of a code audit personally. I feel very uncomfortable in general about this kind of app because they collect a lot of information about people, and it's very easy for PII to leak. And just because the company thinks that they have got no holes and they're not collecting any PII doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't actually collecting any PII. So I'd kind of want to see a little more detail. This is a case where it really needs a lot of due diligence, I think, and I appreciate that Deb is looking into that. But we really need to cross the T's and dot the I's on this one.
Yeah.
I would
That's
agree.
your
And
question.
I think the other really important thing that we need to take a step back for the community is to contextualize this. And it also goes back to the survey. Why are we talking about this tool? And we're talking about this tool because the New York Department of State, Department of Health, and Department of Ed is saying that we need to do mandatory screenings for staff coming into the building. And we're going to have to do screenings for children. So one thing I'd like to ask you, Dr. O'Connell and John, is I think, and Brian mentioned this, touched on this about the survey, when you're asking people whether they're going to stay, are they in or out, we need to contextualize where New York is versus the rest of the country. We're not Florida, we're not Texas. And so we have to help them understand what the actual guidelines are 6 feet of distance. Are we talking about masks, and so I think, I don't know if you're prepared to do that now, but I think we have to start telling the community, because this in isolation, people aren't going to understand. I read the requirements, so I know, but we're talking about this tool because staff is going to have to do a self-assessment every day, right? And so are students.
Right. And there's certain pieces for students too. The reason why we brought it up, Beth, was this bubbled up on the from the thought exchange of the screener pieces. So again, tonight our focus was to touch upon things that did bubble up, and we figured, well, let's share where our thinking is right now. Relative to that. So, good grounding piece, it is a requirement. Certain questions are required. And Josh, to your point, we'll continue to have Deborah look into that for the questions you've posed. But we did want the opportunity to share with the board, based on that need, based on that requirement, to have temperature information on everyone, screener information as well. And based on that, we're looking towards utilizing some electronic means, which the guidance also talks about, to help us get that information. Because remember, if you think about the school day, we need that information prior to a child entering the building. So if we were to do this one by one, you can see we would never get them into the building. Maintaining 6 feet of social distancing, I can't even imagine how long the line would be. So that's why we're looking at utilizing, leveraging tools to help us facilitate that. And from my understanding as well, we would also receive a piece that would say, these are the students or staff that did not complete the screener, et cetera, as well. So good questions that are raised, good thoughts, but the context is it is a requirement, and we're looking at ways to leverage that. And it's good to pause on that because we're so entrenched in reading the guidance documents that it was good to take a pause on that.
So a couple of questions to follow up on how this would be implemented. You said before, a moment ago, that, yes, we'll get a list of those students, those staff who have not completed.
That is my understanding.
Right, which would mean that whoever is monitoring the entranceway to each school will have to have that list because, sort of like TSA, you'll have to be pulled out for secondary screening if you have not done this.
Right.
What about buses? We had talked before, back in the task force, we had been talking about buses being, people doing screening or monitors doing screening before kids got on the bus.
So that's not a reality.
Right, and we realize that's not a reality.
Right, because if a child, let's say, didn't complete it, or the screening didn't take place there, and the child was there alone at the bus stop, no one is leaving a child at the bus stop. So when children are on a bus, they will all be wearing masks. And then when they come to the building, it's when we'll have assessed that they've done the screening or not. This is part of going back to Beth, your question earlier about communication. There's a communication plan just around this piece. There's a communication plan just around the masks, and proper how to put it on, when were we wearing masks, etc. But definitely we are looking while we're in the building for 6 foot distancing, mask wearing. We have the screener before the school day, etc., to try and then get that into the muscle memory that this is what we do each day. We're looking at ways to either via the app or other means to remind you have to do the screener, etc. It's a muscle memory, and this is what we were going to need to do daily. I will tell you, we are having ongoing conversations of, and we haven't landed yet on maybe starting the year out still with having us check temperature as well. But we're not there yet. That has a complication in itself, but we're giving that some thought. So again, we're looking to leverage tools to help us with this mandatory piece to enable us to get students in a very organized fashion.
I appreciate the desire to use technology for this, and I think that the only way we could really possibly do it is to apply some technology. I just think we need to do our due diligence around it, of course.
Well,
the one thing that I would also ask is, right now we're talking about screening just the students and the staff, but there may also need to be a question along the lines of, is anyone in your household showing any of these symptoms?
I believe
Because
that is
that
one
is-
of the questions. John, I don't have the questions in front of me. It talks about, I think there's a question, have you traveled to a hotspot? And what we've identified as the hotspots, not we, but the governor. And I don't have all of the questions in front of me, Josh, but they do get to some of that.
And
Right.
we are able to customize.
Okay.
And I may have made an inference, fact checking Neil. It is not in the Play Store, so I may have been making an inference that it's an easy download, but it looks like maybe it's an app that they push out upon registration. So that I stand corrected there. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Now, I guess the other question is, what about those who are neither students nor staff who are going to be entering the school?
Like vendors and
Like vendors and
type thing?
work people, etc.
Yes, we have to have a protocol surrounding anyone coming into the building, and we will have that protocol. It won't be, if they're a normal person, I don't mean normal person, coming in, a regular, better word, coming into the building, we would include in the daily, but we have to have a visitor and protocol surrounding that.
I know if we do
Deliveries, things along those lines.
if you do go with this link app, there is a kiosk setup that we could set up so that we could still have it be for those users as they come in as well.
except for the temperature check, which obviously would have to be performed
Mhm.
by our welcome
On
center
site.
for security.
So we're still developing that protocol, but with that, along with that, it really comes a protocol, a visitor protocol, and what are, we're having conversations about that. I want to talk about a closed campus soon, tonight, and I know we'll get there, but the piece of giving great consideration to that alone, forget about what form they're filling out, but, we're really limiting people into the buildings. Okay, so we knew that would stir up some good conversation, and that's why we want to make sure that, people get to see our thinking. It's all about seeing our thinking, so, we can, have conversations ahead of time before we fully land. So this part of our evening, and we're wrapping it up now. Again, you've all been so gracious with your time. We really want to be sharing where we are right now. And again, not knowing what's going to come next week, not knowing if there'll be additional guidance. Again, I have those 4 webinars, Tuesday and Wednesday, that include the Department of Health. So again, we want to share where we are now. So, John, did I lose the presentation?
My apologies, are coming right back up.
Thank you. Here we go. Okay, so next slide, please. Let's go back to the beginning. I always like to go back to the beginning because sometimes when we have very long meetings, we forget where we were and where we started, right? So plans, again, are due on this Friday. No pressure, right? So we will be putting our plan on the website, and I'll be linking that plan when I apply, or I should say submit to State Ed and the Department of Health. It is a living document, understanding that as we flesh all of these things out. So for example, we just had a great conversation about leveraging a tool. So we're going to have information about screening, and that might morph a little bit over time. It's a living document. There are 3 scenarios that we need to bring forward in our document. If schools fully open due to low or no spread, which is a normal operations, everybody is back in, 100%, minimal distancing. And that's the one scenario we have to report to the state, what that will be. We'll probably have very limited statements to make about that piece, right? Because we don't believe we're there now, but we still have to, with the hope of being there at some point. Schools open with enhanced distancing, that's the hybrid and the split schedules we've been talking about, or due to a substantial spread of COVID-19, then what does the remote plan look like, right? So those are the 3 things. So next slide in terms of our recommendations. So, John, oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I lost my slide for a minute. Got it. Sorry. So if schools are closed, so you see the picture with the substantial spread with the red stoplight. Basically the schedule John has been sharing throughout is what we're going to be recommending to our community and board. If we go on to PVC, again, if schools are closed, we're feeling that we're landing in a good place with something along these lines, understanding times might differ, et cetera, and going to the high school. We've been pretty consistent throughout all of the presentations on this particular piece. And what's nice is there's a time for a full class in the week, and then there's time for really drilling down to the small. And again, not losing the forest from the trees. That small group interaction really came through with our surveys and things that really resonated as working well when we had live interactions. Moving on, our recommendations. I don't know if I'm freezing or if it's freezing. I might be freezing.
You should be on the left side.
Got it. I'll talk fast because I don't know if I'm losing my bandwidth. These yellow, if schools are opening with enhanced, this is what we're recommending, and why we're recommending it is as follows. If you look all the way to the left, it says grades K through 2. We really feel we'd like to get as many of the elementary students in on 100% time, you know, and then in this scenario, grades 3 and 4 would be on the split for CET. If you go to PVC, that would be the split. And if you go to CHHS, that would be the split. The e-learning day is Wednesday. So if you go back in our thinking to the last week's meeting, we gave you several scenarios of what a split could look like. Based on feedback, we're landing on, if you look at all 3 schools, K through 2, 100%. The special ed, special classes that Karen spoke about earlier today, that would be 100%. And then grades 3 through 12 would be on the split. And when I say split, it's the AA, e-learning day, BB. So those are our recommendations there at this point, based on the information we have and based on the earlier scenarios. We're still continuing to look at the distance learning piece for medically fragile and for those that other people that might want that option. We're still pursuing that. And then, of course, we do have to tell the state what our schools fully open would look like with low or no spread. There would be normal operations with minimal distancing. We'll probably still look at trying to, when we first transition to a fully open, probably look at still some of the minimal distancing, looking at cohorts, looking at hallway traffic, looking at cafeteria. Again, really trying to be cognizant of that. If we go to the next slide. We are having conversations and we'll be looking to the board for support on, we really want to look very carefully at the usage of our facilities, that after school, we want dedicated to cleaning, et cetera. So we're really looking at closing down our campuses at the end of the day so that we can be very cognizant of what's needed to get ready for the next day. If it breaks our heart, our buildings are really a source for community activities, et cetera. But we feel for health and safety and the needs we have to get ready from one day to the next, our buildings and grounds team really need to have that time. I know Mrs. Duback has had some conversations with some of her students, and especially students from the task force. We are also going to be closing down the high school during the school day because we're spending time looking at a model which minimizes transition. So remember back to the high school, we had larger block schedules to minimize transition of kids moving in and out of classes. Then to have them during a lunch period, then go off into town and mingle, et cetera, it kind of defeats what we're trying to accomplish during the school day. But I will, for any of our students that are just wonderful and are still listening tonight, Mrs. Duback will be meeting with students, as will Mr. Plotkin. But I just want to concentrate on the seniors. They've really reached out a few times to say, this is a hard schedule for us, my words. And that we can't all be together. Could you look at scheduling from a grade level perspective? And we did. but we looked at it from, there are some older students that need to be there for younger students if parents are working, et cetera. So not every senior was happy with seeing a schedule of, breaking things up perhaps by alphabet or otherwise. But Mrs. Duback is working with them on looking at, are there ways to bring a grade level together? So she's having conversations with them. Maybe one of those e-learning days is something that we adjust our cleaning schedule to maybe later in the day, so that we can have a cohort come in, a grade level come in, maybe for some activity and, with social distancing, et cetera. So she is continuing to have conversations with our student body. Once we land on our schedule, they will start having frequent meetings with their students, so that everybody is understanding and on board, which is part of our communication plan. But I did want the board to know we're also recommending that it be a closed campus during the school day to minimize the mixing of cohorts. We can never eliminate that, but we're trying our best to keep, minimal transitions between periods. That's why the block schedule, we're trying in the other PVC and CET to keep the cohorts together as much as possible. Not to say there won't be times then there could be, two smaller cohorts in a same area, let's say a gymnasium with social distancing. But those are the things for health and safety we're trying to maximize as much as possible. And the last thing, if you go to my last slide there before
you get to that, if I could,
sure.
a couple of questions on the what you've talked about. The first is closed campus at the high school. Would that be the case even if you're in the green light scenario?
I would want to give that thought, Neil, because
I'm concerned about the
answer
capacity
right now.
of having, no kids going off campus and everybody going to the rotunda or the cafeteria.
Right.
The
That's
other
a great
question was,
question. I'm just not ready to answer
No,
that.
that's
I really
fine.
want to have, Dr. Meir in the conversation, Department of Health or whatever.
the other question is on the red light scenario for CET. The schedule says for the block starting at 1:50 in the afternoon, it says science Monday, social studies Tuesday, science Wednesday, social studies Thursday, science Friday. Would that be true?
John, can you call that up?
Sure.
Please, thank you. And to your point, Neil, we've had so many iterations of these schedules. So, and again, when we say these are drafts and subject to change
Sure.
in times, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying here, if you look at that, it says in essence, 3 periods of science, 2 periods of social studies. You have a similar thing at 8:20 in the morning, where Monday, Wednesday, Friday is reading, Tuesday, Thursday is writing. Is that going to be flipped in the second week, or is it the intention to have more reading, less writing, more science, less social studies?
It's definitely not meant to say that. I think it's really indicative of the way elementary teachers use their time. There is a lot of teachers will say, I am really at this point in my elementary curriculum stressing a science unit, and I'm using that a lot of time more towards science, potentially in 1 week, maybe more towards social studies in another week. We do even it out. And the same thing is true with reading and writing. They really work hand in hand. And I think the way it was written was just meant to be indicative of the teacher using that time as either a reading and writing block, alternating, with based upon the teacher's discretion, and same with then science and social studies.
Okay, because on the yellow CET, that's what you have on the schedule. You have
Neil, I see
ELA
reading and
block,
writing every day.
and you have a science/social studies block each day.
Yeah.
And so that's really what you're talking about.
Oh, so notice actually looking more closely at the schedule, if you're looking at 8:20, 9:50, reading and writing are always sort of flip-flopping which comes first.
Right, but what I'm saying is that if you go to your green CET, you have an ELA block in the morning, and then you have a science/social studies block in the middle of the day. So what you've done on that is, what's on the screen right now, is you've actually shown it's almost like teacher choice in that, and that may be more accurate for the red block,
Yes.
I think.
Yes,
from what you said.
in this yellow schedule, we had mentioned it last week, but we didn't reiterate it this week, is this was really meant to be indicative of the typical day. Obviously, everybody in the elementary school doesn't have specials at the same time or lunch at the same time. This was really meant to just give you a picture of the typical learning that happens every day. Slightly different times for different grade levels, but basically this type of a feel where there's that ELA math, ELA block, the math block, time for academic specials and lunch.
And it's just an opportunity to illustrate the live piece, which I know was, something we really wanted to show. And another piece that I'd like to share, though, is, our principals and curriculum coordinators and other teachers will really now be diving very deeply into, well, what would this look like for grade 1? What does this look like for grade 2? And so forth and so on. That we really start to drill down deeply into those conversations. So for the purposes of tonight was to show you where we landed, what we're recommending, what you'll see in our plan in terms of the concepts in our plan, and really to show in our plan how it looks on an elementary, a middle school, and a high school level. Moving to the last piece. Okay, and I mentioned this last time, I'm bringing it forward again. This is the approved calendar that we did way back in February. I will be at the next board meeting bringing forward 2 additional superintendent conference days. So most likely we'll be looking at a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday superintendent conference days there. In that week, I believe that's how we worded it, John, in that week, but 4 together. And that comes from the November day and the March day, bringing those forward and including them in all 4. I will tell you that the New York State Council of School Superintendents has been having conversations with the governor to see if we can get some more superintendent conference day. That impacts the 180. That's why they're having the conversation at the 180 day at the level of the governor. We would love to have additional days because we need the time to prepare with all of the safety protocols, et cetera. So at the next meeting, we will be bringing to the board a calendar consideration and just putting out a little bit more time just in case we hear something after next week. So that's where we are with that. And with that said, final questions?
I have a couple of questions. This is Brian. They're both technology related, but not really the same question. One is, since it seems apparent that there will be 1 or more remote learning days, like all remote learning days, do we know how many of the teachers are able to support that from their homes? Like, is that potentially an issue that we need to resolve?
So John, do you want to answer that?
Yes, we are not aware of any connectivity issues with any of our staff. We are also positioned to make sure that all of our staff have devices. So no, there should be no issues with being able to deliver remote instruction from teachers' residences.
Okay, good. Second question, and it relates to the survey and potentially some other things. There are families who do not have technology, right, at their homes. So how are we ensuring that they are participating in this process if they want to? How are they getting notification of a survey that's available to them? They can't go onto Thought Exchange because if they don't have Wi-Fi or a computer. So how are we addressing that?
Well, we have been sending out notifications for all surveys via K-12 alerts. I honestly have not had anybody say I got an email and can't fill out the survey. Of course, if they did, we would really figure out a way to invite them in to fill out a survey. But I have not ever had any outreach pertaining to that. I know, Brian, that we did do a lot of outreach during the springtime e-learning to survey our families with regards both to devices and in terms of connectivity. We we didn't say it in this meeting. I think we actually, Deb, I think you said it, that we are going to have devices. We will be 1-to-1 K through 8. We are planning to be bring your own device 9 through 12, and any student that does not have a device to bring will be given a 1-to-1 device by the district. We are also in the springtime did survey our community with regards to connectivity. We did have access to MiFi, which are basically sort of self-contained Wi-Fi connections that you could bring into a house. That we did provide to a small amount of families, but as reported to us, Brian, there was not a lot of issues of a lack of internet connectivity within our students' houses.
And
Okay.
to your point, Brian, that was one of the last questions on the survey we're sending out again, just to make sure we had the information last time and remedied that. But we were asking it again, just to be sure.
Right. I guess the sort of the question really is how do we know they're getting it, right? If they don't get K-12 alerts and if they don't get emails, then how do we know that they are participating in this process
Yeah,
prior to the school year beginning?
I hear you. And to John's point, I haven't received any calls saying we're not getting information or we need it in another method.
Right. They wouldn't, right? If you didn't
Yeah,
have an
but they
email, you
do-
wouldn't know that you
yeah.
didn't get it.
But
Well-
people tend to know, like when I have a snow day and things like that. So you bring up a good point. We just have to think about our mode of communication is basically via K-12 alert. Unless we send a text message out, I don't know. I'd have to give that some thought, Brian.
Okay. Yeah. Just because there are a certain segment of the population that may not be getting emails at all, nor texts, I don't know, what that percentage is though.
Yeah, sending them a K-12 alert when they don't have, if they don't have a computer, right, I hear you.
Debbie?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to follow up with Brian for 1 second. I'm just wondering if we could use some of our community partners around that issue, because I know Croton Caring Committee has a pretty deep reach out to families, and they may have an idea of who some of those, or if there are any families that are dealing with that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Andrea. And I know our counselors are very well aware of families that have various needs. They've never raised it to us, but we certainly, as Brian was talking, I was thinking about our counseling team and Karen as well. Karen Gatto would also maybe have a sense of those in need. But we also have our data from last year, from March to June. So we could also tap into that information to see, is there another way to reach out?
Right, because we're going to send out a survey that has various questions about what would you do and what are you comfortable with, and if we are not reaching certain people, then we won't. Then we're where the data is a little skewed.
Yeah. Good point, Brian. Thank you.
Actually, and to follow up to that, and I believe Dr. O'Connell, you've mentioned this before, our outreach to incoming kindergarten families who obviously wouldn't be signed up yet for K-12s. Have we started pulling together that data in order to be able to reach out to them?
Well, we have we have a list of all of the incoming kindergartners, and knowing that they're not fully in our system now, we've been emailing everything out to that list. So I think the last time, John, you sent something about the thought exchange, and then I sent the last K-12 alerts. So they're getting the information through an email.
Great, and they'll get this next survey then as well.
Yes.
Great.
I have a calendar question. As I looked at the calendar, staff were supposed to report on Monday, the 31st. And the calendar, as we now have adopted, shows that 2 days of professional development, first day of class Wednesday, September 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you had mentioned moving to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't see. It's so tiny. I can't see it. Sorry. We're thinking of the shift there, Neil, and it's just too tiny for me to see.
So you're thinking of the 4 days, having staff come in
prior to Labor Day.
Prior to Labor Day on that Tuesday, which would be September 1st.
Correct. Thank you.
And then they would be professional development September 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
Then Labor Day, and class starts on the 8th. So now what you've done, though, what that does is there's the 1 day, which is the 31st of August, that you have not dealt with, because either you've got to move 3, got to add 3 superintendent conference days for the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
It wouldn't be the whole week, unless we get additional days from the
right. So then you've got 3 days, right? And which would be superintendent conference days, Monday through Friday, and then you'd have to make that up those 3 days somewhere else.
So again, if we don't have additional days, I can't have the 31st. I have to start the superintendent conference days 1, 2, 3, 4. Then school would start on the Tuesday.
On Tuesday.
Yeah, if we get additional days, then, hallelujah, we can look at some additional days there or not. So, but right now I have to work with what I have, right? And so we would take a date from November, and we would take the day from March. So if I can see the yellows, so those would be the 4 days that were allotted as of the scenario now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Were you done, Neil? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, as long as that works out, and we have the other issue of the maximum number of days that we can have teachers work under the contract, which I think is 187.
Correct.
We just wanted to make sure that we've.
Right. And that's a really good point. We always have to make sure we're hitting our contractual pieces. We would probably also be recommending then that November day and that March day would be the professional development day, that half day. So that's where what we're thinking right now. So we would still have some student contact time, count for a day. Because in the I want to say it was either the document that came out of the state or the New York State Ed Department, the 180 is fixed as of this point. but minutes are flexible, which we have some latitude with minutes. There was the 995
Right.
one
Right.
that you were so good about monitoring last year or the year before. And yeah, so we have some flexibility with minutes, but as of this point, not the days. So we not only have to watch the SED days and the state, what the state governs, as well as the, the number of superintendent conference days.
So is it possible that we may need to change one of the now vacation days to an instructional day in whole or in part so that we meet the 180 and meet the 995?
I don't think that's needed as of this point.
Okay,
So, but I always look to, we have a calendar committee, which is made up of folks from various bargaining units. And the question I always ask is, okay, with this scenario, are we, honoring everybody's contract? So if we are proposing a change, John and I would be sending that out to our calendar committee to ensure that they don't see any violations to their contract.
okay, thank you.
Josh?
A couple of things. Number one, I feel I confess that I feel very hampered by the fact that we don't have any more guidance yet from the governor. And
I think he wanted to get the plans in.
yeah,
And the fact that the commissioner tells us that they're living documents, that's very helpful.
Right.
But I hear you.
But my frustration is really in the fact that no matter what instruction we get, we're going to be taking an experiment on our kids in September. We're doing experimentation. We don't know what's going to happen. My personal worry is that there are so many unknowns here that it is entirely possible that the transmission rate will go up significantly in September as people come back from whatever travel they did, and as the schools open and kids are back in touch with each other and people go back to work and are in contact with each other. We just don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know whether this is a planning point for us or is something that is an advocacy point for the advocacy committee. But I kind of wish we were waiting. I just kind of wish that we were going to say, well, we're not going to take a risk with any of the kids for the first 3 weeks. And
so, Josh, to your question, we did pose that question. Remember the 3 scenarios, right? In person, hybrid, or remote. So we did pose, if the state ed is saying we have to have plans for those 3 scenarios, and the governor says, let's say schools are open, wherein lies the latitude? Is it the district that can say, okay, we're going to start off fully remote? Or where does that come from? So to your point of wanting more guidance, that's one of the questions we posed.
right.
So
and we don't have an answer on that yet, right?
not to my knowledge. Again, the interim commissioner kind of deferred to I just want to be respectful that I have it right, that kind of deferred that we'll hear more from the governor, but the guidance does speak to 3 different scenarios. So, if governor says school is open, do we as a district have the latitude to say, okay, we're going to start with a fully remote plan, or we're going to start with our hybrid plan? There seems to be an indication, and again, I look for more guidance, that it's an in-person option if he says school's open, but I'm listening very, very carefully to what we hear.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I do totally appreciate the difficulty of the work. and all of the effort that's gone into these plans. There's an old saying that plans never survive contact with reality, and I know they're going to end up changing, of course, in some way as they begin to touch reality.
And I have to agree with you. That's why I've said it, a lot, and we have to keep saying we have to be able to, go from one scenario to the other. I might have to send out a K-12 alert and say, okay, tomorrow is a fully remote day. And until further notice, it's a fully remote plan. Or, we stay the course with our hybrid. The only thing I'm 100% sure, I guess I can't even say that, but we're not ready for the in-person plan with minimal distancing. But, nonetheless, we still need to, be able to be that flexible. And that means, like, if teachers have their devices, they need to go home every day with them, because something could, an alert might have to come based on the situation presented to us at the time. And that's why the superintendents have stressed ad nauseum the partnership with the Department of Health. And I'm really looking forward, I rarely say that, I'm really looking forward to a webinar with the Department of Health, but I really am for tomorrow, because we've been very clear. We want clear guidance on, somebody tests positive. What's the protocol? Who's our contact at the Department of Health? How is the contact tracing going to work? We know globally how contact tracing is going to work, but let's drill down. How will it work for our district? What's our responsibility? How are we going to communicate, et cetera? So I'm really looking forward to tomorrow and our partnership with the county has been very nice so far. So I'm really looking forward to that.
So that just raised another question for me when I shudder to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What happens in that situation involving a staff member and the handoff of the devices, the handoff of the instructional material to a substitute?
That's a good point. And it has certainly been part of our conversations. The first thing we're doing is trying to increase our sub pool. And I will tell you that that's not easy, given the fact that everybody is trying to increase their substitute pool. So that's step one, Neil, is let's just get bodies, and people on our substitute list that are ready and able to step up to this. And then we would need to be working with our substitutes to work those things out. So that part of our plan will come. We're not there yet. And this is a major crunch week, as you can see, with four webinars with the Department of Health. Somehow that information will need to, or pieces of it will need to get into our plan. We're finalizing our draft plan. We're having conversations with various folks. Our nurses have been very, very active. I want to give a shout out. Thank you. Our Dr. Meir has been involved, our administrative team. So we're all working to work towards Friday. So it's really a very busy week in all districts to ready for Friday.
So Dr. O'Connell, can you just give the community a sense of when you're anticipating talking about the safety, the health and safety requirements that are going to be in place if we're in the second scenario where we're doing the hybrid model?
Yeah.
Just so people.
That's a really great piece, because we really feel that's our community forums. In our planning, we have 4 community forums, and what we want to do is, you see how long it's taken us to just go through, right? Yeah. All these pieces, and it's exhausting, and it's like a marathon trying to share all of the information. So at the task force, we've talked about the community forums needing to chunk the information. So health and safety, as you saw from the thought exchange, you'll see it on the regional thought exchange. It's any conversation you're having with anyone. That's going to be one of the first one. Or if not the first one, the second one. They're all pretty tightly put together so that we can drill down and look specifically at the health and safety pieces. What are we doing? What is the classroom with the social distancing, and what are we doing with signage and face masks and hand sanitizers and hand washing protocols and all of that, Beth? We're thinking that really could be a dedicated one community forum.
And I mean, can you give the community right now, because we are going to be asking them to do the survey, can you just very quickly, or I could do it and you could tell me I'm incorrect if I get it wrong, like the basic things the department, DOH and the, Department of Ed are saying are, you have to have social distancing and it's got to be 6 feet, right? It can't be 2 feet. It's got to be 6 feet, right?
Or 12 feet at times.
Or
12 feet for choral, choirs, and music, right? They're saying no interscholastic, athletics right now. They're strongly recommending mask wearing,
and as are we.
Right.
So we really want mask wearing. We'll be talking about taking mask breaks.
Right.
But even usually it's said when 6 feet can't be achieved,
Yes.
but we're looking at mask wearing, throughout the day with breaks and, of course, when eating. There are times in instructional periods where that might be a good time for a mask break. Maybe. Right. I mean, if you're giving a presentation, so I think we have to, use our heads too. But yes, we're really relying heavily on the face covering. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. And then also, mandatory screening, including
mandatory screening, which is definitely in the guidance, Beth. So,
right. And including restriction of visitors, like, you can't just walk in, you are going to be screened. I understand the details are important, but I think just from a high level so that people understand, we are not recommending a plan that says there won't be social distancing. Mm-hmm. The state is requiring it. The Department of Health is requiring it. Right. We're not saying there won't be masks. There are going to be masks because our state is saying that, right? Mm-hmm. We have to fill out, there's going to be screening because our state is saying that, right? So just people understand that they're not maybe in a different state that isn't asking to do that, right? That
Correct.
They're here in New York.
That's a good point, which does get confusing sometimes when you're hearing on the news all of the different states and what they're, but yes, that's part of the mandatory pieces.
Right.
And if we go back even to last week with the puzzle, health and safety is the utmost. All of our plans are built with health and safety. So when we look at a classroom and we see the desks are 6 feet apart, it's because of the social distancing. That's why we have to split a grade level into right. two. Why do I have to have 2 kindergarten rooms? Why am I breaking that class into 2? It's because with the social distancing requirement, we cannot have the whole class within the class in order to achieve that. So we needed to break it into 2.
Great.
So everything links back to a health and safety, either requirement or a strong recommendation, et cetera. Hand washing protocols.
Right.
Principals are thinking about that. How are we working that into the day? How and when and all of that. Hand sanitizers, where will those stations be? How can students and staff avail themselves to that? What are our cleaning protocols? So to have Paul Gibbons talk about what buildings and grounds are doing. It's so multifaceted, but thanks, that was a good high level view.
And Debbie, if I could just follow on. So with regard to chunking these up and talking about them in community forums, if I look at the reentry timeline from last week's presentation, it seems like we have one. Is it tentatively or is it confirmed scheduled for August 4th as the first of those community
Um,
forums?
I think we haven't nailed down that first one, Sarah,
Okay.
because just waiting for the guidance. And he says, Governor Cuomo says he's coming out next week. I just want to, I don't know if that's too soon, because what if it's the latter part of the week? I don't have a calendar in front of me. What if it's the last day of the week? Then I've had a community forum before I have full guidance, and I'm really trying to not keep going out with some unanswered. I understand that's a beautiful thing to try and strive for, but so that's why that first one, I'm a little not sure I'm landing on that yet.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to see if those were still tentative, just so
Yeah, we might
the community
shift
wasn't.
them, because for some reason I said to myself, oh, he'll come out with it at the beginning of the week. And then I was like, I don't
Yeah.
know. So, yeah.
All right.
Great questions from the board. Are we good?
Other questions from
I
anyone?
don't know that we're good, but
Well, as good
I'm
as we
kinda
can
with
be.
I'm pretty much with Josh on the we don't know the science, and
Right.
it makes me real nervous. We've never had a fall with COVID, right? And
Mhm.
so
Right.
is
we don't
true.
know, and
Right.
so I'm still, in the back of my mind, debating, like, will I send my kids to school? I don't know. I'm not convinced that Governor Cuomo knows everything, and I think there's a lot of people in our district who feel probably that way as well.
Mhm.
So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I thank the board once again for your thoughtful questions, for giving us a chance to really share the great work of the task force, the administrative team. When we say rely on community, et cetera, what great partners they have been. So thank you again to the board and the community that have joined in this evening. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Dr. O'Connell,
Yep.
and John and Denise. Thank you for putting together these very thoughtful presentations. And I know we will have continuing discussions as we learn more from our state and county, and we're just keep
And
moving
our
along.
community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we will look forward for the survey to come out this week with regard to the remote learning.
Yes.
Is that, yeah. And then we will, just, like I said, keep moving forward. So that
So
brings
my
us to the
final,
end.
just,
Yep.
I'm sorry, my final piece, Sarah, I know you and I talked about this, was I really want to gain a sense of what we've presented in terms of our, our recommendations, that, I have board support, because it's really, I feel also a partnership. Closest thing to policy, I think, without being policy, is the schedules we're putting forward. And we gave you our recommendation of the, the hybrid one, the K2 piece. We gave you the, also the piece on the remote, et cetera, a calendar in theory. Where is the board in support of what it is we're putting forward? I got a thumbs up there. I can't see
It's hard
everybody.
for me to see everybody. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm having a hard time.
I can see Neil.
I'm putting a thumbs up.
Okay. All right. Josh. All right. Brian.
Yes.
All right. And I think that leaves just me. So, yep.
Okay. Yeah, and I really appreciate that, because, in my conversations with fellow superintendents, it was something we grappled with, because this, again, new territory, right? So I really appreciate that. We all want to be on the same page, moving forward together, because there we have our strength of thoughtful thinking and stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, that concludes your superintendent's report for the evening, I think. And we will move forward to the closing of the meeting. So let's see. So we will actually be ending our meeting this evening with an executive session. So as in the past, you will see from the community, we will end our recording as we head into executive session, and we expect to adjourn immediately following the executive session. So thank you for those in the community who tuned in to listen to our meeting tonight. And with that, recommended action that the Board of Education enters into executive session to discuss the employment of a particular person or persons.
Sarah, I would like to add to that, and current litigation.
And current or pending litigation.
Current litigation, yes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right. Thanks, everyone. I will see you in executive session in just a moment. And good night to the community.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.